So my brothers and my sisters, as we embrace this urgency of creating the beloved community, now is the time to be loved. Love means understanding, redemptive goodwill toward all which seeks nothing in return. So be loved by implementing the demands of justice to eliminate the school to prison pipeline that has so many black children entrapped. Be loved by correcting voting policies that seek to suppress the votes of millions of black and brown people. Be loved and implement the demands of justice by transforming a society that is disproportionately violent toward black lives, including black transgendered lives and indigenous lives. Be loved and correct false narratives and economic policies that continue to divide and pit poor and working class black and white people against each other. Be love and implement demands of justice where systems and structures are deconstructed and lead the way of living in community that reimagines just, humane, equitable, and sustainable policies, practices, and behaviors. Love your enemies. Bless them that curse you. Do good to them who hate you, and pray for them that despitefully use you and abuse you. Be loved and do justice and love mercy and walk humbly with our God.
My name is Terrence Lester, and I would like to welcome you to the King Center's 2023 Beloved Community Global Summit. Today, I will serve as the moderator for this important panel discussion. But before we get started, I would like for a few of our panelists to introduce themselves, to give you a little background about themselves and their work. We'll start with Gail Zotz. Could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your work?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. This is I'm in healthcare and been doing this work always. You know, I grew up in social justice, so I was 15 doing this work, and had my own personal challenges along the way, right? And had to like meld to the difference between what happened to me, right, and sort of like my own experience and sort of how I view the world and what I bring into it. So I'm just like super honored to be here. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Next, I would like to introduce Dr. Jacqueline. Dr. Jacqueline here to introduce herself. Okay, we'll continue to move forward. We were going to have Mayor Michael Tubbs with us, but he got suddenly ill, and we just want to wish him a speedy recovery as he recovers. So I just want to say thank you, Gail, for introducing yourself. I'm excited to introduce this panel discussion. The name of our session is How We Got Here, Thinking That Leads to Unjust Systems. This panel discussion is a critical conversation and will explore the historical influences, foundational components, and current manifestations of the thinking that help to lead to the creation of various unjust systems. We'll have a discussion, Gail, and we'll discuss how unchallenged thoughts, trauma, biases, the quest for power, and a dismal understanding of history are key factors in actually perpetuating injustice. And before I delve into our conversation, Gail, I would like to use two of Dr. King's quotes to give both context and critical framing around our discussion. The first one is from Where Do We Go From Here, where Dr. King writes, "We have inherited a large house, a great world house in which we have to live together, black and white, Easterner and Westerner, Gentile and Jew, Catholic and Protestant, Muslim and Hindu, a family unduly separated in ideas, culture, and interests who, because we can never again live apart, must learn somehow to live with each other in peace." In this quote, Dr. King is calling us to see the world as our address. He's challenging us to live together in a peace that the beloved community affords to us all. The second quote for Dr. King says this: "If we are to have peace on earth, our loyalties must become ecumenical rather than sectional. Our loyalties must transcend our race, our tribe, our class, and our nation. And this means we must develop a world perspective." Dr. King uses phrases like world house, global village, beloved community to call us into a interconnected, interdependent, interrelated mindset. In his book, Where Do We Go From Here, he suggests that all inhabitants of the globe are now neighbors. And the theme for the King Center's 2023 King Holiday Observance is "It Starts With Me," cultivating a beloved community mindset to transform unjust systems. This derives from M.L. King's teaching. Two of the main facets of a beloved community mindset are: one, understanding that we are interconnected, interdependent, and interrelated; and two, that we must be person-oriented instead of thing-oriented. And I would like to open up our panel discussion, or our discussion, Gail, with a question. How do you think how has a mindset that reflects the opposite of these facets impact the systems, the policies, and the practices in this nation and across the globe?
Right? It's totally the right quote to address the question, which is, he says, being interconnected, being interdependent, because what does it start from? Blame, separation, naming, right? Personally, right? It starts with me. So I'm angry. Just let's say I'm justified, right? We have justified anger. I don't know about you, but I certainly have had things happen to me, right? Like bad things. We have justified anger, and then we focus on that and separate. And so the first thing has to be, it doesn't matter. Look, I was left to die in the basement of a nursing home, literally, like blind, just like warehoused alone. I ended up homeless with 4 kids under 9. I have justified anger, but what is the purpose? What does that do me? It doesn't do me any good. People say, "Oh, aren't you angry about it?" I said, it's toxic. It's literally poison for me. So it doesn't matter if I personally have a right to be angry, to be separate. It's not useful to me. And so then I think if we take that to a society, right, we separate, we blame, we're hostile, we finger point, we have names for everybody, right? And all along the way, as long as we do that, we're never going to get past it. And I think, and I told you, I was just so inspired rereading some of the things that he wrote about this, which is just, it absolutely has to start with, they were talking in this last panel about like a reset, right? Stepping back and saying, it doesn't really matter what I'm entitled to or what I want. It's about, what am I bringing, and is that useful, and is that good? And then how does that connect us in love? And that is really, I think sometimes that some of the most courageous things I've done have been completely in private, you know?
Mm.
And and that's where individually we need to find courage so that we can join together, because the question is, where does it start from? It starts from, I think, from all of this separation and anger.
Yeah, I think you make a very interesting point about the anger and the separation. In the work that I've been able to do myself, mainly with the unhoused community, I've seen this growing social and political rhetoric that frames a group of people that demonizes and criminalizes them. And I think, one of the key aspects in understanding like how unjust policies are developed is how people are actually framed, right?
Right.
And when we think about ML King's call to love neighbor, right? To see the world as our address, we've got to challenge the way that we've been socially framed to see our neighbors,
Right.
because this social fashioning has kind of caused us to develop some of the anger that you're talking about, would you say?
Yeah, and and if we go into this question of the unhoused, right? There's a the all the time, right? The real
Mm.
name that people say is the homeless, right? And now the unhoused. So I've been an executive, and I ended up without a roof, living out of a car with 4 children because we left violence. I had to protect them from severe felony level domestic violence, and this was the best solution for them. Now, was I a different person then? So was I then the homeless? I was the homeless with 4 kids. Or was I the executive I was before and after? Or am I the, like, let's take out the, right? And why, you know, we choose what we take with us from our traumas,
Yeah.
individually and as a society. And that's a choice. We don't have to be all of our trauma. We
Right.
choose, right?
Right. Yeah, I think the point that you're making about the labeling, right?
Mhm.
Um, sort of, you know, upholds this mentality of it's us versus them, or you
Right.
know uh, this sort of elitist idea that only the selected few are able to be considered valuable, and it goes deeply into developing this mindset of separation that goes against some of Dr. King's philosophy of about us being interconnected. We what King is kind of challenging us is to say, when I see my neighbor, right, I'm seeing a part of myself um, that I need to deconstruct the labels, the false notions, push back against the false narratives that may be persistent because of false social norms that label people. Would you say?
Yeah, 100%, right? Like, are we only the one label? And, why is it radical? It's radical because we have to step totally above that and act in love. Now, obviously, it's a little sad that love has become radical, right? But because there's this notion that when we do for others, it's actually when we're really doing, we step outside of ourselves.
Hmm.
We don't say, "What do I think you need? What do I want you to have?" I say to you, "Tell me. Tell me. What do you need? What do you believe that you need? And how can I sit there with you in that? And how can we rise together?" Right?
Mm,
It's not about what I think. And
mm.
so, but that's radical to say, I'm coming outside of myself. And we sort of look at, like, we're talking about how do we go from this personal to society? Because I think it's this thing. Step outside of yourself, step outside of your group, step outside of your neighborhood. And yet, when you are in all of those places, act with love. Like,
Mm.
and what does that mean? Like, love, and it means all of you. And it means,
Right.
right?
Right. And this love calls us to be proximate to neighbor, right? Not just geographically or physically, but this sort of cognitive awareness of what's around us, right? There's this clinical term called inattentional blindness, where you can be around a thing but still be blind to it. And I think what you're suggesting is that if we push back against this mentality that pushes against the beloved community, that we have to call ourselves, or allow love to call ourselves, to this sort of awareness. How do I show up and be aware to love the unhoused neighbor? How do I show up and be aware to love my Muslim neighbor? How do I show up and be aware to love someone who comes from or emerges from a different social location from me? Because no matter what social location you emerge from, Dr. King is saying the world is our address, right?
Right.
And if we're being called to love the entire world, that we have to show up and push back against these types of mentalities that uphold these false narratives and such. And I would like to follow up the question to ask you, and I know that in your work that you come against like mindsets, right, that have been influenced and continues to be influenced by unjust policies and outcomes and systems. And I wanted to ask you, what are the unhealthy thought patterns that yield injustice and inhumanity in the area in which you advocate change?
Thank you. So I'm in healthcare, right? And here's what's really interesting. The World Health Organization says that it's all of your situation. So the World Health Organization says you don't just have diabetes. Are you able to get food? Are you safe? Do you have shelter? Are you at war? Do you have drinking water? Do you have transportation? It doesn't. The World Health Organization doesn't say, we're just going to talk about your diabetes, right? We're going to name you as a diabetic and treat you. The US health system says not only are we just going to treat you as a diabetic and not even think about how you're getting your food or anything like that, but we're going to only pay people to treat you when you're sick. It is a
Mm,
system of sickness, right?
mm,
Because I use this analogy a lot. You're walking down a sidewalk, you fall down, you break your arm. You go to the hospital, they get a fee to set it, to wrap it, to scan it. Each thing is a fee for sickness. But what we need to do is shift it completely and say, look, we want safe sidewalks so that people don't come in. We need to financially incentivize doing what's good and right. But equity says every single neighborhood must have a safe sidewalk. It doesn't
mm,
matter your zip code. It doesn't matter your social economic, right? Well, that's radical, because we're going from how do we shift an entire system, which is the most expensive drain on our society, from sick to well. And
mm,
part of it is because in your question of like sick thinking, unhealthy sick thinking, is that we're thinking in the US only of health as a box of another
mm,
title, right? I'm gonna define you by your sickness. Other countries that oftentimes spend less and have much better outcomes say, no, we're gonna look at you holistically. We're going to
mm.
talk about food. We're going to talk about housing. We'll spend $1 million on an orthopedic surgery to correct something and send that person back on the streets to have the entire surgery destroyed because they don't have a safe home.
Wow. So the way that you're describing this is that to really address systemic issues, we need to go to the root, right? That we need to stop putting band-aids, so to speak, on issues and really address systemic things that keep people unwell. Would you say?
Yeah, right? And sort of how do we do that? I think that part of our earlier conversation, right? We have to stop by labeling the separation and start by
Mm.
looking at the total cure, the total health, the total love. And
The
and then
total
how do
love.
we the total love, right? I'm showing up, loving you completely, right? We're in this moment. We're sharing this moment, and this is what matters. And you were talking about, like, who do we show up as, right? And am I showing up completely? And am I showing up to be here with you, to be present in this moment? I mean, I am right now, and so I'm full of joy, right? But we don't do that. We don't do that individually, and we don't do it as a society, right? And in my field, and that's what's so frustrating. We say that my field is healthcare, but it's really like ends up being the business of health. And I
Mm,
don't want that. That's not what I wake up dreaming about fixing and making better in the world. Health, health should be all of it. Are you how are you mentally? How are you spiritually?
right.
Not just right? How are you? I was dying, right? I was blind in an electric wheelchair on liquid only nutrition, warehoused because I became the other, right? And
Wow.
and it was about it was about it wasn't just about a diagnosis, it was about having coming out of that in love and then bringing love and I know that I was very inspired by the video that just played, that we should be love, right?
Right.
But it's really hard. I mean, I'm sure, it's interesting because you're in the housing side and I was on the streets, so we have a different but similar concern for that issue. um, we need to come together, just like he said, and say it's not just about one silo, you
Right.
know?
Right. Dr. King actually in his quote, he says, if we are to have peace on earth, our loyalties must become ecumenical rather than sectional. Um, he said that a sectional mindset keeps us from peace and it keeps us from being a part of the beloved community. And I think this is an important idea for us to explore because, as we think about this quest for self interest and this quest for like self gratification and the exclusion of others and othering people,
Right.
it keeps us from love, but it also keeps us from seeing the whole community, as you spoke about. And I would like to ask you, in your work, what part of a quest for power and self-interest and security has played in a role in the creation and sustaining of these unjust systems and policies, like in the area of housing and healthcare, lending and technology, even banking and education? What would you say?
Here's the problem, right? Certainly in care, it's a business, right? It's a business. Um, and yet it's about caring for human people. And it's very hard for those two to ever connect. You have people who are interested in running the business, who don't care at all. And they're in the business of buying and selling people, to be perfectly honest. That's what
Mm,
healthcare is. People and buy and sell what we call beneficiaries, which
mm,
is people who, based on their insurance or that sort of thing, literally like brokering people. And that is a lot of the business of healthcare. Now, how do we connect that to to people who are in so much pain physically and emotionally? Like it, it's like here and here, right? Business side and the fact that these are people's lives on a day-to-day basis. And somehow we have to, for sure, we have to financially incentivize doing the right thing, but we also have to get to some of your kind a little radical, right? We have to find a way of saying it's all of me, it's all of the people, it's all of a population, and a population is all of a community, and a community is all of the world. Um, and doing that, knowing that a lot of what drives, and I'm not anti-business, I mean, I'm in business, but what drives a lot of the sickness of the system is the fact that people are motivated just straight up by I don't want to say profit, but something that's very far from humanity.
Yeah, I mean,
I-
you know, in this,
That's
yeah,
me, like
yeah, no, in the space where I work, I mean, we see this in like the rise of, policies, harmful policies that actually criminalize those who are unhoused. I mean, we could talk about the law that was just passed in Tennessee that makes sleeping outside a Class E felony, right? Camping outside, which was followed up by Missouri, who also just passed a law that makes it hard for a person who is unhoused to exist. And, when we think about how social and political rhetoric influences, right, the creation of sort of these policies that kind of dictate or attempt to dictate the human worth and value of people who are unhoused and or otherized and or vulnerable. These policies set up this belief, right, of who's deserving and who's undeserving,
right.
who should be included and who shouldn't be included.
Yeah.
And what Dr. King is telling us, that if we're really called to this idea of love, if we really start to see ourselves as being interconnected and interrelated, how dare we, right? How dare we try to define the worth of another human being based upon a harmful policy? How dare we hoard power for ourselves, right?
Right.
For our own self-interest, for capitalistic interests, to and use that as a platform to demonize those who have been marginalized and excluded in society and culture. And for me, so like when I see the housing side of it, it's almost like, how dare we create more inaffordable housing, right? And
Right.
gentrify communities, right? And push people and displace people, and become almost what King is saying, militaristic in how we uphold poverty in our country, right? And so,
And
yeah.
and then what happens when people feel they have no hope?
Mm,
When you have no hope, right? And you have justified anger,
mm,
and you have nowhere to go, we often go to violence and then are
mm.
blamed for it, right? Well, look at you. Look at you. Look at
Why are
how
you
you're
so
acting.
angry?
Why are you so angry? Now I'm saying, have the courage to rise above justified anger.
Mm.
And I'm
That's that
saying,
radical love.
right, right, right. And have the courage to love people for all of them, you know? Like w- d- I can't even tell you what it's like to not have a roof. Like it's so dehumanizing, so demoralizing. Everything is so much harder. But at
Mm,
that moment, why is I'll tell you. When we were going through this, I was totally unprepared for it, and we were standing outside of a Salvation Army, and I couldn't figure out like how to get the food in the food line. I mean, I was like a super educated person, like I didn't have any. And you know what I got in that line? I got love.
mm.
People were like, "Oh, you're kind of new here. Like, let's help you." So it's how we show up without judgment at every moment,
Mm,
right?
right.
This is so beautiful. And I think this also starts with me, right?
It
Because I
starts with
think
me.
right.
It starts with me going back to one of the facets of a beloved community mindset, being other centered, right?
Yeah,
Versus being centered.
right.
Um, and I want to follow that up. Like, what do you think are some of the things that influences this quest for like power and self-interest? Like, what are some of these things in
Fear,
society?
fear,
Mm, mm,
right? Fear. I'm afraid of losing what I have. So I'm going to build a wall around it as if that's possible, right?
mm,
Didn't COVID remind people that no matter what you do, there is a level that you cannot control what happens, you know?
Mm.
So who are you showing up with? But I think it's fear, right? And so we have this individual fear that then becomes cultural fear that then needs to blame someone. And if we look at history, that's been the pattern again and again and again, right? I'm afraid that I'm going to lose my house, my money, my job, whatever, because the economy is doing badly. And so I'm going to build a wall and I'm going to protect me from you, the other. And then I'm going to get even more scared and more angry and I'm going to blame you. And then we're going to act violently towards each other, right? Again and again and again.
Yeah. So fear, that is a really great point. I would like to add to that, this, this thirst and quest for superiority, right? Um, to use this quest for power and self-interest to control another group,
Right.
right? Or to use my power in the way that I dominate the narrative to define another group, to label another group, right? To maintain this sort of superiority that is oftentimes grounded in supremacy, right? And so, like, it's this quest for power, and not only the quest for power, but also the quest to control other people.
Right.
And in King's
Which is
beloved,
impossible. Which is
right?
impossible.
In King's beloved community, all are equal, all are welcomed, right?
Yes.
How do you think, as you survey, the area in which you're most involved, that how do you think how do we insert this idea of radical love, right? How do we combat this thought of the quest for power, this quest for self-interest? How do we combat that with a beloved community mindset? One, and what are some of those thoughts and ideas that actually go against a beloved community mindset?
Right. I think it has to be with how do I show up? Who am I showing up? And I think that was talked this audit that was talked about earlier, right, is totally on point. Like checking myself and how am I showing up? That's one. The other is we it has to be okay how you show up, right?
Mm.
Like maybe you're not able to fully show up and that's not helpful at all because if I immediately say, "Oh, well he's not showing up in love or whatever." So therefore, no, I have to rise above it and say it doesn't matter, right?
Mm.
I'm going to keep doing it. I'm going to keep, like I see in business people doing awful things all the time, really awful things. But what why do I want to enter into that? Like what good is that? It it goes back to becoming unjustified, you know?
Right.
And acting in love. And then sort of looking at big steps. I think that every time we put a the before a person, we're on the wrong path. So let's take the away, right?
Right.
And then
I
let's
think
look at yeah, go ahead.
I no, I think it's a powerful concept that you say that we should pay attention to how we are showing up. I would love to explore that a little more, and even add to it is like
Yeah.
not only paying attention to how you're showing up, but pay attention to the uniqueness of what you bring as you show up. If you're in a certain sector, how do you leverage the skill sets that you already possess to show up? If you have a certain platform of influence in whatever field that you have, how are you showing up and leveraging that influence to create or push back against anything that goes against a beloved community mindset?
Mission. Richard Bowles wrote about mission, right? And he said the place is where your set of skills and passions that God gave you matches what the world needs most from you,
Mm.
right?
Say that again. That's good.
Yes. Okay, what is mission? It is the place where the talents and passions that God gave you match with what the world needs most from you.
Wow. That's powerful. And, it makes me think about one of the things that Dr. King said in this book, Where Do We Go From Here? He actually said, one of the great liabilities of history is that all too many people fail to remain awake through the great period of social change. So he's really exploring this idea of like being alive and breathing and in community and in environments, but slumbering, right? And I think what you're saying is so true. Like, how do we understand our uniqueness and what we bring to our communities, and matching that to the whatever need or whatever thing is before us, and that's where we really find how we show up.
Right.
um, we show up regardless if people or things are slumbering around us. And I, when I read King, I hear this sense of urgency, right?
Right, which we lose sometimes, right? We lose
Yeah.
that. But it's absolutely like it is urgent because it matters. Like make it matter
Mm.
because this is all we have, right? A few moments. And 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 make it matter how we show up, and I'm going to let you address this question, or you want to you want me to read it.
Yeah,
the
sure.
quest for the quest for power, I think, begins with relinquishing need for material possession and investing on personal self-care talents and ability to serve others. So I think that yes, um, and I don't think it has to be one or the other, right? It has to be with how do you frame it? Like, is this question of investing in self care talents and serving? You can do those with material things and with non
Yeah.
material things. To be
Right.
perfectly frank, when you're hungry, and I don't know if like who in the audience has been hungry, but I'll tell you, I've been hungry. I,
I've been
worse,
hungry.
I've had children hungry, right?
Yeah.
Knowing and like surrounded by so much wealth, knowing that they hadn't eaten.
Mm.
Then material matters a lot. That's a material
Yeah.
thing. So I think it's it's not naming even what do I need and what do you need and what do I need to give to you. If it's material, it's material. If it's
Yeah.
if it's if it's self-care, you know what I mean? Go ahead, you tell me. What are you thinking?
Yeah. I think I love this
Me
statement.
too.
Yeah,
It's great.
it makes me think of the both and, right? But it also makes me think about stewardship, right? um, and how you actually use your power, how you actually use
Right.
um, influence, right? I think, even in the chapter we were reading about, the great world house and how King dealt with like our quests and our pursuits, and, having this great sense of the moral framework, right? Um, I think that power notion is like, where do you start within? What is your moral compass saying, right? Because in King's beloved community, poverty and hunger and homelessness can't be tolerated, right?
Right.
This standard of human decay, right, and how we treat one another can't be tolerated. Racism and all forms of bigotry and discrimination can't be tolerated. Prejudice can't be tolerated. And so when I think about this notion of power, it's like, how are you stewarding your voice, right?
Right.
How are you showing up to speak truth to power, to leverage the power that you've been given, right? Because we all have some sort of power just because we are alive, because we have inherent worth, value, and dignity. But how are you leveraging the power you have been given to ensure that other people who've been excluded from the beloved community are considered beloved.
So now think about that. If I'm focusing on that, I have a lifetime of work ahead of me. And I'm
Right,
not concerned about what you're doing in your backyard, right? I'm
right,
focused because that's a lot of work. I'm focused on my work. I'm focused on my work with the world, right?
right,
And if I'm really there, I don't have any time or energy to be
right.
concerned with what you are not doing.
Right. And the other part of that too is like, maintaining that we hold to both and I'm like, yeah, for us to continue to show up and be committed to this work for the long haul, there is this sense and urgency to care for ourselves, right? That as we have to care for ourselves, invest in ourselves as we are showing up to ensure that we stand in solidarity with those who have been excluded. I wanted to ask you, Gail, because you have some really interesting insights about healthcare. Um, how do you think in your field or your industry that the like misuse of history and being dishonest about history actually continues to uphold this sort of trauma, right, that we've been seeing?
You're like, okay, so let's look at a few things, right? We talk about equity. We talk about like doing like that there should be health equity. Health equity means, right? Remember, safe sidewalk in every neighborhood. And yet we consider success if we know half the time, 50% of the time, what color your skin is and what gender you were born at. Like, meaning,
Mm,
if I don't even know you, if I don't count who you are and what you need, how can I possibly serve you equitably? Right?
mm,
You want all kinds of clinical trials. We look at heart failure between women and men. Women are
mm,
totally unstudied, even though they have way more. We look
mm,
at we look at treatments. The Black community, the other minorities, they're not given the same options to treatments. They're not
mm,
integrated, right? So we'll test a treatment on a 50-year-old white male who is housed and fed and safe, and then
mm.
we'll market that treatment and say, this is what's going to work for everybody. If I don't know you, if I don't try to know you, how can I possibly serve you?
Mm. Could you say that one again?
If I don't know you, if I don't try to know you, how can I possibly serve you?
That's powerful. That reminds me of a quote that we have hanging in our center, that says that you can never meet the needs of people that you've never met. Right?
Right.
It's this idea of how we are to not just be proximate around people, but present with people.
Present, right? And we were talking about that earlier, right?
Right.
Being present. We're present here, right? We're here with each other. It, if I can be like this the majority of the time, I will be living my mission and I will have stepped into my power, right?
Mm,
Because it was the time when I had no power, when I stepped into my power,
wow.
right?
Yes.
With love, with courage. It was the time when I had no power.
Mm,
That's when we get to choose, right? Am I going to use this time to step in and step up? Or am I going to use this time to blame and to
mm,
separate? Right.
right.
This is
Yeah.
thank you for this. This
Yeah.
is like
Yeah. I mean, that's powerful. When we are developing or adopting this beloved community mindset, it leaves no room for blame, right?
right.
Um, because it's on a mission to be connected, interconnected with neighbor, to love neighbor, to show up radically, uh, and push back any ideas that is about sectionalism, right?
Right.
That keeps us from one another. And as we close, I would like for us to just leave our global citizens who are watching and listening, uh, what's one thing that people can commit to, right, or sustaining as we walk away from this important discussion?
You know what? I'll do it right now. Terrence, I love you and
Hmm.
thank you for this. There.
I love
I'm
you
sh
too. Yeah.
You see? That's it.
Yeah.
That's where we start. We recognize and we say it out loud. We name the good instead of
Mm.
naming the other, right?
Wow. I think, wow. I'm personally very impacted by that. You have no clue, just like you have a story. Last year, I almost lost my life. I was in a severe car accident with my wife. I spent a month in the hospital, had to learn how to walk again. Went through all types of mistreatment in hospitals and with the healthcare system. And, I remember hearing people scream out for their medication because they weren't receiving proper medication. And you don't know me, but you saw me. And I think a
Yes.
part of seeing people is this power of acknowledgement. And when I think about the beloved community, a part of being interconnected with you, a part of being in this global village with you is being able to have this gift of acknowledgement. So I thank you and I acknowledge you back. And I
Thank
think
you.
as we, leave, I want to close with a quote by Dr. King. It says, today our very survival depends on our ability to stay awake, to adjust to new ideas, to remain vigilant, and to face the challenge of change. The large house in which we live demands that we transform it, this wide world neighborhood, into a worldwide brotherhood, right? This worldwide neighborhood into a worldwide brotherhood. Together, we must learn uh, to live as brothers, or together we will be forced to perish as fools. And I think that leads us to this idea of togetherness in the beloved community. So I just want to thank, the King Center. Um,
Thank you so much. This is such an
and
honor.
to all of those who have participated in today's discussion, we just want to say thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nonviolence is the answer to the crucial political and moral questions of our time. The need for man to overcome oppression and violence without resorting to violence and oppression. Man must evolve for all human conflict a method which rejects revenge, aggression, and retaliation. The foundation of such a method is love.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. changed the world when he demonstrated what could be achieved through nonviolence. Now, you can learn how to live and practice this philosophy yourself through Nonviolence 365 Online, an innovative digital experience developed by the Martin Luther King Jr. Center for Nonviolent Social Change. Nonviolence 365 Online features extensive video interviews with real nonviolence practitioners, including the King Center CEO Dr. Bernice A. King, King Center certified instructors and trainers, and veterans of the civil rights movement. Explorations of the historic campaigns that helped Dr. King forge his philosophy. Immersive, annotated reading experiences that enhance Dr. King's most influential writings on nonviolence. Custom activities, including quizzes and interactive scenarios to help you practice along the way. Real-world exercises to help you start applying nonviolence in your daily life. Nonviolence 365 is a love-centered way of thinking, speaking, engaging, and acting that leads to personal, cultural, and societal transformation. It isn't just a concept for philosophers or political leaders. Nonviolence 365 is a powerful, practical approach to dealing with conflict and dismantling injustice. Whether it's in your personal life, in your school or workplace, your local community, or a national movement. Dr. King, Mrs. Coretta Scott King, and many others sought to create the beloved community, a society built on global cooperation and equity. This wasn't a lofty utopian dream. It's a realistic and achievable goal because each and every one of us has the power to make it happen by committing to nonviolence as a way of life. Take the first step today with Nonviolence 365 Online.
The Martin Luther King Jr. federal holiday is a day on to educate, advocate, activate. The King holiday extends beyond the one day and beyond the United States to encompass global, comprehensive, strategic work to eradicate the triple evils of poverty, extreme materialism, racism, and militarism to create the beloved community.
As recent events have shown us, we cannot wait. The most pressing issues of our time demand that humanity envision, strategize, and organize toward a more just, humane, equitable, and peaceful society with nonviolence as the pathway to that world.
We encourage people across the globe to use the MLK holiday and the days following as a way to engage in meaningful service, to advance the important work of groups, organizations, and entities that are engaged in initiatives to address systemic issues that have created disparity and perpetuated inequality.
What are we celebrating on MLK Day?
We are really remembering and reflecting upon a gentleman who gave us a means of coexisting together as a humanity. You know, how do we really get along and cooperate with all of these different beliefs and ideologies? That's really what we're commemorating.
President Reagan made Martin Luther King Day official at a Rose Garden ceremony today. Mr. Reagan had expressed early reservations about honoring the slain civil rights leader with a national holiday, but he signed the bill that had passed both the House and Senate by large margin.
In 1994, Congress passed the King Holiday and Service Act.
This celebration of Dr. King will now be a celebration of his vision of community, his vision of service, and his life proves that it will work for all Americans and for our country.
The bill was introduced by Congressman John Lewis and Senator Harris Warford, both of whom worked alongside Dr. King in civil rights activism. Participation in the MLK Day of Service has grown steadily over the past decade, with hundreds of thousands of Americans each year engaging in projects such as tutoring and mentoring children, painting schools and senior centers, delivering meals, building homes, and reflecting on Dr. King's life and teachings.
It's time to put ego and pride and fear and power aside and employ love and justice. My father reminds us that power at its best is love, implementing the demands of justice. And justice at its best is love correcting everything that stands against love.
Community engagement also includes initiatives in the form of peaceful protest, awareness and education projects, and philanthropy efforts to address critical health, education, human service, human rights, and environmental needs. We want this engagement to continue beyond the holiday and for volunteers to commit to having impact in their communities year-round.
So these young people are being prepared differently than I was because they live in a different time. But the most important thing they have to decide is not just to get an education and to be selfish about it, but that they must prepare themselves to give back and to make a difference in the world. We have to create what my husband called the beloved community. If we are to survive, we have to learn how to solve our problems and resolve our conflicts in a nonviolent manner. And so I think it's important for them to realize that they have a personal responsibility.
The MLK Day is a defining moment when many commit to service. We believe it will spark continual volunteerism that is strategic and impactful for the greater good, so we can build resilient, equitable, and sustainable communities worldwide.
The future belongs to those who show up, to those who come together and continue the good work of building the beloved community. Over the past few years, we've witnessed an awakening, one filled with shock and anger, alongside fear, pain, and exhaustion. We've seen bold claims and commitments, and new voices stepping up. Change is happening. But with change comes resistance. Ushering in a new way of living, one free from racial division, requires rigorous persistence, nonviolent persistence. A love-centered way of thinking, acting, speaking, and engaging that leads to individual and societal transformation. What better way to build the beloved community than by bringing people together over food and conversation? In partnership with Inclusive, formerly known as Civic Dinners, the King Center is inviting you to host a beloved community dinner and continue the work of bridging the racial divide. Are you in? Here's how to get involved. Sign up to host a beloved community dinner. You'll receive the host guide with the 3 big questions. You can invite your neighbors, peers, colleagues, family, and friends to join. And you can host at your home or at your favorite restaurant or online. Simply follow the host guide for an amazing conversation and experience the power of community. You'll walk away feeling refueled and inspired with new ideas, connections, and resources. In times of isolation and exhaustion, simply coming together in community can make all the difference. Together we can build the beloved community. Join us.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome back to some of you. Some of you have been with us for this summit for the duration of the day, and we're so grateful. This is our next panel, which is unlearning and relearning to create the beloved community, or to unlearning and new learning for a beloved community mindset. So I want you to, if you've been with us, to go ahead and drop wherever you're watching, and YouTube comments, Facebook, Twitter, send out a tweet, uh, drop in the comments under the live stream that you're watching on Facebook, put in the comments on YouTube. What are your thoughts about this summit so far? And did you catch the 3 tangible outcomes we wanted you to have? To commit to cultivating a beloved community mindset, to commit to broadening your loyalty, to commit to organizing via partnerships and coalitions. This is how we will cultivate a beloved community mindset to transform unjust systems. Listen, we just don't want to change our thinking. We want to change it toward good. We just don't want to cultivate a different mindset. We want to cultivate a beloved community mindset and then go and create the beloved community. I'm excited about this theme for the year for the King Center. It starts with me, cultivating a beloved community mindset to transform unjust systems. And I just want to lead us into this next conversation. I want you first, though, to share. Wherever you're watching from today, whatever platforms you're on, go ahead and retweet this broadcast on Twitter, share it on Facebook, copy the link for it on YouTube, and share it with family and friends. Let's keep it together. Let's get other people engaged and involved. And listen, do this. Tweet out some great quotes that you heard, something that inspired you. Use the hashtag BCGS. Use hashtag transform unjust systems. And then finally, hashtag beloved community mindset and tag at the King Center. We want everybody to be a part of this. This is the 3rd annual Beloved Community Global Summit. This panel, Unlearning and New Learning for a Beloved Community Mindset, is so important. I tell you why. Because we all have stuff that we need to get rid of. Dr. Bernice A. King, our CEO at the King Center, she talked about weeds this morning in one of the conversations, how we have some stuff to dig out and then some stuff to put back. So we have to unlearn, and then we need to have some new learning for a beloved community mindset. And I have some powerful, great, phenomenal people who will join me for this conversation. I'm probably going to let them do most of the talking because they're out there doing this powerful work for a community. I want to bring on first Shane Claiborne, who I call now brother and friend, who is a leader of Red Letter Christians. Listen, Shane's work inspires me. From the work he does to combat gun violence, to the work he does to stop people from dying on death row. That's a labor, because you're seeing people and you're talking to people who are about to die, state-sanctioned murder. And we know Dr. King talked about the death penalty being the final word that we won't forgive, that we're not willing to move forward in love. So I want to welcome Shane Claiborne from Red Letter Christians, activist, author. Welcome, brother.
Hey, Dr. West, it's so good to be with you. So good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to be with you. I'm looking forward to seeing you Saturday.
Hey, I'm all ready. I got my bag packed back there. I'll be there tomorrow.
You ready? Welcome to this conversation today.
Thank you. I'm so excited about it.
Wonderful. We also have with us Kazu Haga, who is the founder and coordinator of the East Point Peace Academy. Anytime you put all that together, Peace Academy, I'm ready. So we want to welcome Kazu today. Welcome.
How's it going? It's good to be with you all.
It's good to be with you. How are you today?
I'm doing all right, trying to stay dry in all this rain here in California, but it's sunny right now, so.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. We were to have, I want to have, if Randima's here, have Randy come on. How are you doing, sir?
Hello. Good afternoon. Good morning. Yes.
I apologize. They put in the chat room, everybody, but I didn't see your name there. Welcome. Thank you for. I haven't met you before. I'm excited about it. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I'm a co-founder at Center for Humane Technology, and so we look at this intersection between technology, society, our mind. There's a lot going on there. You may have seen some of our work in the social dilemma. If you haven't seen it, it really helps you understand how social media is kind of distorting our minds, democracy, children, values. It's a kind of a mess. And so, but I think it has a lot to do with how we see each other and how we can kind of reharmonize. So excited to dive into all this with all of you today.
It is, of course, Randy, Kazu, Shane, we'll touch on social media a bit today. It does kind of distort. The first thing I tell my nieces is, you don't know all those folks. She communicates like she knows all of those people. I'm like, they're not, but you know, the Facebook friends, friends is in quotations, you know, you're not really friendly. And there's some things, because it's a great tool. Technology can be a great tool. But Dr. King talked about how we could destroy ourselves in the misuse of our own instruments. And
And we
that's
are.
where we are there with that. And we are.
I think
So
we
we
are.
can talk about that a bit today, but thank you, all of you, again, for being with us on behalf of our CEO, Dr. Bernie C. King, who is somewhere interviewing with someone right now. We thank you. We're grateful. This conversation, these panels are intentional. Their purpose to move us forward. We just don't want to talk about something. So we shared some tangible outcomes we want people to take away. And that first tangible outcome, as we talk about unlearning, is that we wanted people to commit to cultivating a beloved community mindset. And Mrs. Coretta Scott King said the beloved community is a realistic vision of an achievable society. She talked about how it's a place where conflict exists. It just depends on how you resolve the conflict. Do you do it peacefully and without bitterness? And of course, she believed that we could do it if we were willing to be educated and trained. She talked about how in the beloved community, that mindset even drives our political policies. Can you imagine that? Where our legislation is driven by love for humanity? Picture, let's all dream. And then commit to the work again of making that happen. We can see that. I believe we can see more of that, create the beloved community in pockets. But I wanted to start out, just by asking each of you, is in your work, I know you may see pity instead of compassionate action. Let's talk for a moment about that. What's the difference, and how can we get to the place where we move from pity? How can we unlearn just a sense of pity and get to the place where we say love? Love is different than pity. So how do we do that in your work? How have you encountered that, and what do you think is possible in us unlearning pity and moving to compassionate action? Start with you, Randy.
Sure. Gosh, there's so much to say. I kind of put some notes together, but one thing I want to add that I think each of us should sort of add something from our work, and the Dr. King said, right, about compassion. True compassion is more than flinging a coin to a beggar. It comes to see that an edifice which produces beggars needs restructuring. So I want to talk a little bit about the systemic forces that are causing like a lot of this problem that we're in. Because I believe that we have to see these systems clearly, right, before we change them. So there's a lot to say about how we change them. But in short, we have a situation now where money is at the center of our economic system. So, of course, what's incentivized most is money making, right? And the structures and a lot of the social structures reinforce that. And of course, that reinforces a lot of inequality, right? And it has this systemic property. So what happens is we have our economic system relies on competition, which in theory is supposed to offer better products to people. Sometimes it does that. Mostly, I would argue it doesn't, at least not anymore. The quest to compete leads to extraction. And when you get competition and extraction amplified by technology, right, that is improving exponentially, we erode the foundation of what humans depend on, right? Nature, which we're seeing with the climate crisis, but not just nature, right? Our own shared understanding, our ability to see the same things with the same understanding, the same facts, the same kind of empathy for each other. Our attention, our ability to focus on what is important and make wise choices, our values, like being generous or being altruistic, they are being superseded by ideas, very selfish ideas. And so this affects all of us here in the room today, but also future generations. And so I think this is a big part of what is driving the inability to be compassionate, to be loving in the deep way, right? When you talk about this vision of a world where policy is made lovingly, gosh, you have to look at, like, that's a different system. And so I just wanted to bring that lens, is to understand the system. Well-meaning people get caught in these races, and all of us get caught in some way or another, right? So Facebook, the things we share, right? Everyone's in this subtle competition. LinkedIn, everyone's like humble bragging, right? There's like this humble bragging we have to do. It's all, everyone's playing this game. It happens at work with CEOs of big companies who, they're all accountable, right? To their, people are accountable to their boss, who's accountable to the CEO, who's accountable to the shareholders. And you end up in this system that's driven by growth and greed, even if the people aren't all greedy. So there's something really interesting to understand there. I'll stop there. I think, there's so many other things I could say, but I think that lens, I just wanted to introduce that.
But you raise a good point, though. I want to kind of frame it for those listening and viewing in the sense of, in order to unlearn the things we need to unlearn to have a beloved community mindset, we have to realize our environment.
Yes.
And in a sense, Shane and Kazu, Randy, it's like we're in the Matrix. And
yes.
You take that right pill and you realize, I've been deceived all this time.
Yes.
And you
But
see
can I just
think differently? Sure.
I just add one more sentence, which is with respect to these concepts like interdependence, right? Interdependence is all about understanding the conditions that shape each of us and the people we interact with and the people we may not like, right? That their actions you may not like. And when I think that these kinds of systems are huge in terms of setting conditions, often from birth, about what we think is right and wrong, what we think our goals should be, all of these things. And they just exacerbate, right, inequality, injustice, and take us away from love and compassion and the things that we need to solve the problems.
Thank you, Randy. Kazu, what are your thoughts on the realization that we're often living in dynamics that we weren't aware of? And that beloved community mindset in a real sense means I have to function in a way totally differently than the community or the world I'm living in. Some people say, like Howard Thurman, when I hear people describe him as a mystic, I think mystic becomes, somebody who totally thinks differently than the conditions that they're in. Kazu and then Shane, share your thoughts on that unlearning by way of realizing that we have to function and think differently than the conditions that we're in.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I want to start by sharing a little bit of my thoughts on the term beloved community, because it's a term that's become more popularized recently, and it's all over the place. So when something becomes popularized, there's a benefit to it because we all want to be talking about beloved community, but there's also a danger in that oftentimes the core essence of these messages get lost. And when I hear people these days talk about beloved community, I oftentimes hear them talking about, oh, well, my beloved community is my church group or my faith or my family, friends group. And to me, those are like loving communities. But when Dr. King talked about beloved community, when Josiah Royce talked about beloved community, they were talking about interdependence, which is a word that we've heard already today. And this idea, like we live in a very individualistic society. And so to see things in a different way takes a radical shift in the way we view the world. And the idea that we are interdependent, it's like a really nice thing to think about. Oh, my liberation is bound up with your liberation, how nice that is. And we oftentimes don't realize the gut-wrenching, challenging struggle it is to actually embody that worldview. It's hard work. I oftentimes start by saying one of my favorite Dr. King quotes is, of which I have like 100. So one of my favorite Dr. King quotes is a very well-known one when he says, "We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality tied in
a single bond of destiny.
That whatever affects one person directly affects all people indirectly." And, I oftentimes wonder how many people really believe that, or whether we believe that the universe weaves separate webs of interdependence based on our political affiliation, right? And that my liberation is only bound with the liberation of people that I agree with or the people that I look with. And beloved community interdependence, it's a universal law for me. It's a universal truth. So even if you don't believe it to be so, you're still governed by its laws. So what does it mean for us to step outside of the individualistic worldview that so many of us are conditioned in, and to begin to really believe that my liberation is bound with the liberation of all beings in society, including the people that voted for the other political party, including the person that may have hurt me the most in my life, right? And develop compassion for those people is gut-wrenching work. But it's powerful work, and it is the work that is necessary for our own healing and for the healing of the world. And so I think when we talk about beloved community, we can't forget that it's not just this like beautiful, easy thing, but it's really difficult work that we need to get.
It's not a utopia. A lot of people hear it and they think it's a utopia. Or what you're saying, Kazu, is very true. People say, I have a beloved community family. But if it doesn't extend beyond your family, how Josiah Royce and Dr. King and Coretta Scott King and all those who taught us about the beloved community taught it is, it becomes a global thing. It spreads. So if I have the beloved community mindset, I can take the beloved community mindset to my workplace, to my school. If I get other people to have beloved community mindset, then we start to have beloved community schools, and then beloved community universities, and then the beloved communities everywhere. And it's supposed to permeate the globe. But it has become, Kazu and Shane, if you can expound on this, because of our individualistic pursuits, it's often hard for us to even unlearn to have new learning and get a beloved community mindset.
Yeah, I think we are kind of acculturated into thinking certain ways. Like I heard somebody say, some of us were born on third base, but we act like we hit a triple.
Okay. If I could pause just for one moment, I want to bring on Dr. Liz Steele Harris. She joined us, co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign. Dr. Liz, come on in.
It's good to be here.
Welcome, welcome. We'll finish up Shane's comment and we'll get over to you. Welcome.
Thank you.
Good to see you, Reverend Liz. 25 years ago, Reverend Liz and I were organizers in our 20s in Philadelphia together. So we go way back, and it's always good to see you. And yeah, Dr. Vanetta, as I was thinking of, the distinction between compassion and justice, that they can go together. They need to go together.
That's good.
We've spent our life in Philly. Just this morning, I'm seeing hundreds of folks getting food that they desperately need. We're doing that every day, every week. But we've also got to ask why people are hungry. And, when Randy was quoting that wonderful sermon of Dr. King, when he's preaching on the Good Samaritan, and he says, we're all called to, lift our neighbor out of the ditch on the road to Jericho. But after you lift so many people out of the ditch, you start to say, we got to do something about the whole road to Jericho. And, one of my mentors said, kind of quoting the old cliche, said, you give someone a fish to eat for a day, you teach someone to fish to eat for the rest of their life. But he said, we've also got to ask, who owns the pond? And that's kind of the work of justice, right? The work that we are sharing food with folks, but we're also asking why people are hungry. And I think one of the things that we've got to do is stay in touch with those that are suffering. And that's what, the Poor People's Campaign has done so well, to center and amplify the folks that are directly impacted by injustice. And, Mother Teresa, who's been a great inspiration of mine, she said, it can be very fashionable to talk about the poor, but not as fashionable to talk to them. And really what we've got to do is stay in relationship with those who are suffering the brunt of these injustices. So we don't just become charity brokers, because you can write a check and not have a relationship, just like you can give $5 to somebody on the street precisely because you don't want to have a conversation. But love calls us to do something deeper than just write checks and hand out money and avoid what love requires of us.
It does. That's proximity is what Brian Stevenson calls that, great founder of Equal Justice Initiative. We need to be in proximity. Dr. Liz, you know about that. The interviews that the Poor People's Campaign shared at that Moral Assembly over the summer. The people who you all had just connected with, who were sharing stories that a lot of people who live in the United States, as this is a global summit, don't know that that type of poverty is happening here in the United States. And it gets back to what Shane said about transforming Jericho Road. How do we do, when we talk about unlearning, I believe one of the main things that we have to unlearn is that charity is all there is. This sense of we're just going to give toward a problem instead of saying, why does that problem exist? As Shane mentioned, that's what Dr. King meant when he was talking about transforming Jericho Road. How do we unlearn charity as the main pathway to the beloved community?
It's surely a huge unlearning that our society needs to go through. You know, and in that quote from Dr. King, I mean, he says, true compassion is more than flinging a coin to a beggar. It comes to see that the edifice which produces beggars needs restructuring, right? And I think that's what we have to be able to show to this society, that kind of transformation needs to happen, and it's possible to happen. I think so often the reason that very well-meaning folk think that charity is the only option is that we are told that that's the case, or and we're told that there's not enough to go around. So the only thing to do is to, you know, redistribute a little bit of the excess to you know, some crumbs to below. But you know, we throw out more food in this country that could feed not just every person that's hungry in this country, but across the world, right? Just in throwing out food, let alone how much food and everything is being produced, right? It takes 45 minutes to build a 3D printed house these days. There are 5 abandoned housing units for every person who is unhoused in this country. And there are, you know, at least 10 million families and people that are living, you know, either in cars or with family or are in some way kind of homeless. But there's 5 abandoned houses in big cities for every homeless person there, right? And yet, right now, the thing that we think is the best to do is a little bit of charity. And so I think some of the unlearning is about actually realizing the true abundance that exists. I think it's looking back at history and seeing how change happens. Does change happen through charity? Sure, we have to meet immediate needs. And if you're not connecting and meeting people's immediate needs, and you're still preaching justice, you know, I have to question that justice. But it's as a step. It's as perhaps even a first step to then a larger transformation, a restructuring of an edifice that produces people needing charity, right? And so then also we have to see that there are policies and programs at hand, ones that work. You know, how can we have had the child tax credit, you know, exist for some months, you know, lift 4 million kids above the poverty line in the United States, right? And then have, you know, really bipartisan consensus to not extend or expand that. So to send those 4 million families back below the poverty line in the United States. I mean, so we have proven programs that we know actually work. They actually lift the load of poverty. They're not charity, right? But then we don't extend them, we don't expand them, we don't hear about them, and so we think that poverty is just inevitable. It might be unfortunate, and the best thing we can do is either pity or punish the poor, and never to imagine that kind of restructuring of an edifice that is producing that kind of poverty, that could be kind of restructured, and we could actually end that kind of deprivation and poverty for everybody across the world. You know, right now we have the resources. We just have to change the moral consciousness and political will.
Let me ask this question, because Dr. Liz mentioned justice and how people have a different definition. What about how we need to unlearn what we think justice is? Kazu, I see you nodding. Randy, what are your thoughts about that unlearning? Because we can share this Kingian. Dr. King had a definition of injustice that I wrestle with every day and I think about. But Kazu, how are we framing justice if it's not changing, transforming systems, and ensuring that people aren't hungry anymore? And I'll tell you, I was thinking about this quote from Desmond Tutu. He talks about we're pulling people out of the river. In essence, he says, now we have to go upstream and find out how they got in there. And I always think some people they were thrown in. Some people may have fallen in because of some injustice they encountered. But Kazu, Randy, what do we have to do to unlearn justice and then to learn it again, learn it the right way, what justice is and what it looks like?
Yeah, I laugh because I work a lot in the so-called criminal justice system of this country, where the concept of justice is so skewed and conflated with punishment, right? I mean, that's the most common, I think, misunderstanding. And I can go on and on about my thoughts on the prison system, but you know, the sixth principle of Kingian nonviolence is that the universe is on the side of justice. And a lot of people, when I'm in conversations with them, are like, well, look at all of the injustice in the world. How can you say that the universe is just? And there was a quote that I read from Dr. King once where he talked about justice not necessarily being about what's good, because that's relative, but justice being about what is balance. That the level of violence that we see in our society is a sign that things are out of balance. And so if you see, if you do a Google image search of the word justice, it's the scales of balance that comes up, right? And if you view it in that way, I always feel like every time a young person is killed in the streets of Oakland, that is evidence that the universe is just. Because I look at all of the investments that we collectively make as a society into systems of violence, into systems of injustice, of inequality, right? We invest in guns and violent media and unjust economic systems and the destruction of the environment. And then when the universe gives us the return on those investments and we see violence in our community, we're like, well, what's wrong with the universe? When that's all we've been investing in. To me, it is justice. It is the order of the universe. It is balance, that as long as we invest in systems of injustice, that we see injustice in return. And so I think if we can begin to see it in that way, and in terms of kind of how we see justice in the criminal justice system too, and in response to harm, like we have this tendency to think that if someone causes harm, it tips the scales of justice, of balance. So we need to cause harm to the other person to balance it. But for me, when harm happens, when injustice happens, weight is placed on the side of harm and on the side of injustice. And if we respond to that by causing more harm to the person that committed it, it tips the scale even more to the side of harm and to the side of injustice. And so what we need to do to bring balance and order back into the universe is to put weight onto the side of compassion and the side of understanding. And that's what can balance the scale when harm and injustice happens.
That, before you talk, and I want to say that goes back to the death penalty, Shane. This idea that by causing harm to the person who did harm, we can get justice in place. But it actually perpetuates what Dr. King called a descending spiral of violence.
Yeah.
Violence just keeps going. So
yeah, it's absolutely right. And I got off a call earlier right before this one of we had a hybrid vigil because there's an execution that happened today in Oklahoma, the second execution this week in the United States. And some people would call that justice, right? And so I think that's why it's so important to really unpack what we mean, because we can throw that word around. And I would say, brother Dr. Cornel West, he says justice is what love looks like in public. And I think that's a beautiful idea. It's what does love require of us? And in the whole, in the scripture, the word justice is connected to rightness, to righteousness. And it didn't just mean getting what you deserve. It actually meant to set right what was made wrong, right? To heal the wounds that have been inflicted. And that's exactly the opposite of what many of our systems like capital punishment do, right? They just create new wounds. They mirror the evil rather than healing the evil. And my mama taught me 2 wrongs don't make a right, But we have used this idea that an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. The best justice we can do is by harming the person back. And I think many of our traditions and Jesus and Dr. King and so many others show us that no, actually, justice is not reciprocating evil. You transcend evil without mirroring it. And that's what love does. So, I think the real question as we think about justice is, I like to say, what is God's will, for the world? Or if that sounds too stale, what is God's dream? And God's dream is not for millions of people to live in poverty while less than 100 people own half the world's assets. Like, that's not God's dream. God's dream is not for 100 kids to die every day in America from gun violence. So that might be one way that some of us could think about is what's God's dream? Like, God's dream is for love to prevail.
Yeah. And Randy, Dr. King said also, justice at its best is love correcting everything that stands against love. That sounds, very similar to the work that you're doing in technology and in other spaces. Can you talk about that for a moment? How we unlearn this idea that justice is revenge and retaliation, and how that applies to the work that you do?
Well, just building on what's been said, I think real compassion and love is hard only because we're not good at it. We don't practice it enough in doing it in the right way, right? Because we're conditioned to doing it in a more selfish way a lot of the time. And so I think it involves, even when we see someone doing something we really don't like, and I'm sort of understating, right? There are many, like abhor, or like there are really harsh versions of that. But that we understand that everyone acts to be happy, right? Every action they take is to be happy. But they believe in that moment to be happy. That horrible act that they did felt like the right thing to do to them at that time. And that's a really difficult thing when it's something that was, for example, against you, against something or a loved one of yours. That's really hard work, I think. So that's, I think, one piece of it that really connects deeply to interdependence and understanding, like, the layered nature of conditions, right? And how they shape our minds over time, and they can lead us to very dark places. So I think that's one piece. And then the other piece is, I think justice involves sacrifice for some. Again, back to this idea, right? Of like, how do you level it out? Well, some of us, I think a lot of us will have some form of like giving up to do. Some have more than others to give up, but that's really important. And a lot of times that is the piece nobody likes to talk about. And this is coming back to this idea of how beloved or loving has been hijacked, right? This idea that's already mentioned. Because no one likes to talk about that aspect of it, right? They sort of always want to talk about, what are we getting? What are we gaining? How are we growing? And there's this like difficult thing of like, actually you grow personally by giving up things, right? And this also connects to the point about charity, right? Charity, I think real generosity involves a measure of giving up something that you're attached to, not just giving the thing that's very easy. And I think those are all difficult things for many of us to do well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we talked about unlearning charity as the main path to the beloved community, and then unlearning what we thought justice is. Let's talk for a few minutes about unlearning sectionalism, because the way we've grouped ourselves off has become much more problematic than it has been even in the past. And not just according to race, but nationalism. There's a movie with, I believe it's Chris Rock, where he's running for office, and he says, every time, I think it's his opponent that says, every time he ends his speech, he says, "God bless America," and nowhere else. And I laugh every time I watch it, because I think, wow, it's satire. But what it's really saying to me is, often in terms of our nationalities, we might not think we're saying that, but our actions denote, the prayers that we do with our feet and our hands and our policies say, we believe we that God is blessing America, or God is blessing any nation, and nowhere else. How do we deal with and unlearn nationalism, division based on religion? How do you posture yourself? Nonviolence has helped me. And of course, at the King Center, we dig into that, because when you get into those principles and you start saying, you know, the universe is on the side of justice. As principle 3 says, I want to defeat evil and injustice and not people. And in principle 2, I choose to win friendship and understanding, and nonviolence is the way. That's rough stuff. You start living that, you know, unearned suffering is redemptive. It can educate and transform. It's like, really? I'm going to choose love instead of hate. I believe that's the way. But what are your thoughts, Dr. Liz, Kazu, all you, Shane, Randy? What are your thoughts on how we unlearn sectionalism?
Well, I think you know, I think we've learned it, and it's been enforced on us, you know, pushed on us. I think much of the division that exists in our society isn't just our personal individual decisions.
Right.
It's that the systemic racism. It's you know, systemic queerphobia, homophobia, transphobia, you know, Islamophobia, you know, anti-Semitism, and I think if we look at it that way, then some significant structural changes have to take place for us to be able to undo this kind of division. But again, if we lean on Dr. King, you know, especially, you know, those last years, when he's talking about, you know, that the Achilles heel of a system, a global system that is racist and anti-poor and pro-war, you know, is to unite and organize those that are most impacted across all of these lines of division. And if we actually, you know, use that as a North Star, if we use that as a, you know, a pulling point, as what we're, you know, the prize that we're keeping our eyes on, of just actually what does it look like when we unite across these differences, and that is happening all over the place. I mean, when I spend time in Harlan County, Kentucky, or you know, was out with striking nurses in the Bronx yesterday, across race, across age, across religion, across nationalities. I mean, so many different folks. You know, there's a real power there, and so, but I think for us to think that it's going to be just us kind of coming together and not pushing up against some formidable forces that actually are trying to divide, and are trying to pit us against each other, and are selling us these lies that either we can do it ourselves, or we're the best, or the others are the worst. You know, we have to consciously push against that and push forward, you know, structural and policy changes to respond to that. And we have to build real bridges across these real borders and barriers, especially when it comes to kind of global outreach and global work. Because again, right now there's mostly, especially when it comes to folks in the United States, you know, so often this kind of U.S. exceptionalism that I think gets so much in the way of real global partnership.
Thank you, Shane.
I think of that line of Mother Teresa where she said, sometimes our biggest problem is the circle that we draw around our family is just too small. And it's not that the love for our own family is bad. It's just that our love has got to be bigger than that, bigger than biology, bigger than ethnicity, bigger than nationalism, right? And this is where, you know, as a Christian, it baffles my mind, because I know, you know, there's probably people of all different faiths or no faith that are listening, but as a Christian, you know, we got this idea that we're born again. And ironically, Jesus had some really hard things to say about family and said, you know, you're not ready to be my disciple unless you're born again. And I think what he's challenging is this idea that we belong to each other, right? It's not just about biology. If someone's suffering on the other side of the border, it's as tragic as if it were your own grandmother or your own baby. Like so that's the problem, I think, is sometimes we just get so caught up in ourselves or the people that we're most comfortable around, or that's the problem with nationalism is it's just too small. You know, that the Bible doesn't say for God so loved America. It says God so loved the world. and we need to love with that global beloved love. That's what we're after.
True. Go ahead, Kazu, Randy.
Yeah. I was thinking about how, as someone who was born and socialized a male, there are certain aspects of myself that I've had to learn to section off, right? Like just the entire wealth of emotions that I'm feeling throughout the day. As someone who grew up with a lot of like childhood traumatic incidents, a lot of my pain from my early childhood I've sectioned off. And so even within my own body, there are pieces of myself that are not integrated. And as long as I'm not integrated, it's harder for me to imagine integrating with the rest of humanity and the rest of the globe.
Wow.
And so I think one of the things that I've really realized is that the more I'm able to do my own personal healing work, and the more I'm able to build beloved community, even just within my own body, the easier it becomes for me to slow down and listen to other people's stories and feel like that's not a threat, even if I disagree with it. I have this theory that if we can slow down enough to hear another person's story, then everything they do makes sense. And it doesn't mean that everything they do is justified or is right or I condone it, but it begins to make sense why people do the things that they do and believe the things that they do. Working with incarcerated communities, I've talked to hundreds of people who have committed some of the worst forms of harm we can commit against each other as human beings. And when you sit down and listen to their stories, it becomes so easy to be like, oh, I get it. It was wrong what you did, and I get it. It makes sense to me, and it becomes easier for me to have compassion for them. And so I think the importance of doing our own work so that we can slow down and honor each person's stories and really listen to really understand who they are, I think can really help us get beyond that sort of sectionalism that you talk about.
We're hearing some ways to unlearn. Thank you each for sharing that, Randy. Yeah.
Just adding to what folks have said, in psychology, there's this thing called fundamental attribution error, right? And this is actually a cognitive thing that we do wrong. We tend to attribute people's behavior to their personality instead of to their conditions, right? We put too much because we don't know. And we just tend, when in a situation where we don't know, we tend to assume someone who does something we don't like is an ass. And that's obviously not the right thing to do, right? And of course, we're very generous to ourselves about that. If we cut someone else off, we say, oh gosh, we're in such a rush. We are late today. This is really important. Otherwise, I wouldn't have done that. Someone cuts you off.
Right.
It doesn't work like that, right? So I think looking for that, and all of us are getting better at just saying, hey, this is a thing humans do. We've got to find when we do that, and especially without groups, right? Groups that are not familiar to us. That's a huge one. And the other thing is, before we try to depolarize or solve political problems, we have to rehumanize, right? If you see someone else as less than human, you really can't begin, even in a reasonable way, to depolarize. So I think, again, just building on what's been said, that's just critical.
You each have shared so much. Can you believe this discussion is almost over? No, really, I think, we don't talk about these things enough, because sometimes we get in that space where we say we need to stop talking and act. But you actually, without having these conversations, it's like, act to do what? Because you can go out and say you're doing justice work, and it's harmful work. If we don't investigate why we do this, how we do this, the love we need to do it with, how we actually need to be invited to do this in some communities. We just don't want to go in and say, hey, I hear you're struggling with this over here. I've come to help. And nobody asks us for help. And so just thinking about all those different layers, we've talked about unlearning, just charity and getting into justice, and then also unlearning what we thought justice is. I want each of you to leave the viewers and the watchers today with just one action step, one thing. It can be one word that you believe we can do to get into some new learning, or just share one thing you believe we need to learn a new learning for humanity, something that we're not grasping collectively, that you believe, just in one word as we close out, that we need to learn as human beings. This is a global community. I think that if we could get everybody to read that World House chapter of Dr. King's last book, Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community, it would be so powerful. And if we could digest it, but thinking about that concept, World House, what's one thing that each of you would share that you believe would be new learning for humanity collectively? A new learn. All of us are like,
It's a bold request.
Yeah.
I'll share a simple thing that isn't as bold as what you said, but the fact that compassion and loving kindness, right? In Buddhism, we have this practice called loving kindness, needs to be practiced. So maybe the next time you're in a train or in a restaurant, look at people and look at them with the eyes of a loved one, like they are a loved one. Just practice that. It is really effective, and it softens your heart to all kinds of people, different ages that you may not normally connect with the same way.
Yeah,
That's
Dr. Vanetta.
It has to be practiced. I want people to make note of this.
Mm.
What we're doing, you have to practice these things until we get them. With this, you're talking about changing our thinking and our mindset, cultivating a beloved community mindset. We got to put some practice in. Shanks?
Yeah, just to related to that is I think we've got to continually denounce self-righteousness. And I think Dr. King does that so well, to say that in the face of the oppressed, we can see our own face, but in the hands of the oppressor, we can see our own hands, and to move forward with a little humility. And because I think that self-righteousness becomes really toxic to our souls, and it stops us from being able to believe that someone else can be different than who they are right now.
That's a new learning today, to believe in the power of change. Because I hear people all the time say that person can't change, that community can't change. I say, well, I need to throw out my whole faith and everything, because if change can't happen, I'm in trouble. Because change has happened for me. There are things I did 10 years ago. If Twitter would have been around 20 years ago, I'd be in a world of trouble if people went back searching through my tweets. Because there's stuff I believed 20 years ago that I don't believe now, that I can't believe I ever believed it. So thank you for that. Kazu.
Yeah, we've all been there. I'll just leave you all with one of my favorite quotes from Sobonfu Somé, who once said that conflict is the spirit of the relationship asking itself to deepen, and to try to use every conflict in our lives as a gift to be able to deepen in relationship with people.
Now that's Kingian, because Dr. King said there's nothing wrong with tension. That creative tension. That's a new learning, everyone, if you're tuning in, because we sometimes shun tension, but creative tension, conflict can get us to justice and to love. That's a new learn. Thank you for that. Dr. Liz.
So I think we need to realize the power of the people, but especially the people that are most impacted by injustice. To be, to see people's plight, their fight, and also learn their insight. In the words of Frederick Douglass, those who would be free themselves must strike the first blow. And I think we all have a role to play. We need to build something huge and across all these lines. But we have to see that those who are trying to free themselves can lead the whole society to liberation.
And that's King. Freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. That's a new learning for a whole lot of people, because often we think that those who are in poverty, grappling with injustices, are helpless. But actually, that's where the power rises, from the people who are dealing with it. I'm so grateful for each of you. Thank you, Randy. Thank you, Kazu. Thank you, Shane. Thank you, Dr. Liz. Thank you for joining the King Center today for this panel.
Thank you.
It's an honor. Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
54 years ago, my father launched the Poor People's Campaign to revolutionize the economic landscape of our nation. Unfortunately, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. did not live long enough to see it come to fruition.
However, on June 19, 1968, my mother, Coretta Scott King, was here in our nation's capital during the initial Poor People's Campaign to deliver a very powerful message on poverty. She stated, and I quote, "Too long we've suffered pious platitudes and made faulty promises to our less fortunate." She made the appeal that poverty is not only a long-standing evil of this nation, but an actual act of violence against the dignity, livelihood, and humanity of its citizens. 54 years later, poverty still has a grip on the soul of our nation. So today, as a bearer of my parents' legacy, and as the CEO of the King Center, I join in solidarity with the chorus of voices that say we won't be silent anymore. Thank you, Reverend Barbara, and thank you, Reverend Theo Harris, for helping to keep this part of my father and mother's legacy alive. And thank you for keeping the movement going. Today, we are here to awaken the conscience of the citizens of this nation. We're calling upon those who have ears to hear, tongues to speak, and hearts to respond, to join the movement to rid this nation of the evil and violence of poverty. You have heard the real stories of those who suffered the injustices of our nation, a nation that refuses to open their eyes to the inhumane realities of poverty, a violation of the dignity, worth, and value of people who are made in the image of God and after God's likeness. As we listen to these voices, we can attest to the reality that poverty in all of its forms is violence. We have a moral responsibility to speak up, to stand up, to show up, and never shut up until all of our brothers and sisters can rise from the shackles of oppression, depression, suppression, and the real violence of poverty, until they are set free to live with the dignity of a livable wage, humane living conditions, just working conditions, access to affordable health care and housing, and the freedom to participate in government, the freedom to prosper in life, and the freedom to peacefully coexist. When I was growing up, my mother used to always remind me and my siblings that somebody has to cut off the chain of violence. Well, I'm asking all people of goodwill and conscience to join us in cutting off this chain of the violence of poverty. I'm asking all citizens, power brokers, and politicians of this nation to pledge their voices and their work toward the elimination of poverty. For those who would argue that there is a deficit of human resources, my response is absolutely not. The deficit is in the human will. 54 years ago, when my father launched the Poor People's Campaign, he called for a revolution of values and a radical redistribution of wealth. I make that same call to our nation today. And do not be fooled into thinking that the issue of poverty is someone else's problem. As my father said, we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. What affects one directly affects all indirectly. Have you considered how the existence of poverty in our nation affects all indirectly? Think about it. The last time I checked, the least of these is quickly turning into the most of these. If the current economic crises or my sisters and brothers' stories today haven't put you on notice, let me inform all people of goodwill, even those that believe they are exempt from this epidemic, that poverty won't stop at low-income workers. Poverty
Poverty won't stop at the suburban middle class. Poverty won't even stop with the business owners and business executives. Poverty is a system that will continue to consume more and more people, beget more violence, disenfranchise millions, and leave even more underserved until our nation and our people commit to creating the beloved community to dismantle it. And it's going to take all of us to do our part to make this happen. We must work from several different angles. While there are those in our society who are turning a blind eye and a deaf ear to the ever-increasing rent for poor and low-wage workers, stay tuned, because I'm working on a pathway to transition them from being renters to becoming homeowners without the requirement of a credit score. As I stand here today, hearing this pain and suffering that my brothers and sisters who are in the grip of economic injustices and inequities are enduring, the evidence is very clear that this nation is guilty of violence, of theft, of oppression, of exploitation, of abuse, of extreme neglect, and the absolute abandonment of the poor, and should be indicted on the misappropriation of resources and the complete misalignment of values, which, if corrected through nonviolent direct action, could lead to the total, direct, and immediate abolition of poverty. Too many systems, practices, and politics have sought to silence these voices that we are hearing today and these stories that are being shared. But we refuse to allow silence to reign supreme, because I hear a cry coming up from the backside of this nation, from the depths of poverty where life ain't been no crystal state. I hear a cry from the mothers and children that have been left by the wayside. I hear a cry from the cultures that have been suppressed by the hands of poverty. I hear a cry from the hungry, the tired, and the forgotten. I hear a fiery cry coming up from the 140 million Americans that won't be quenched by the lukewarm words of apathetic politicians, systemic racism, or the presence of war. A cry that won't be quenched by corporate greed or excessive materialism, but will require a great reckoning and realignment of our morals as a nation. Until we get there, though, we won't be silent anymore. So I encourage you to keep sharing your stories. My brothers and sisters, keep standing up and keep speaking out. Keep your eyes on the prize and know that God Almighty is with us. God's word reminds us that the darkest hour is always before the dawn. So don't you stop now. Don't you get weary in well-doing. Walk together, children. Don't you get weary. Keep working together, children. Don't you get weary. Keep struggling and holding on together, children. Don't you get weary. Keep mobilizing and organizing and strategizing, Reverend Barbara and Reverend Theo and all the people, and don't get weary. Fuss if you got to, fight if you got to, but get over it together, children, and don't get weary. But don't forget to pray together, children, because you might just get weary. But one day, if we continue to walk together, children, we will be able to eliminate poverty.
Wow, I was really into that. That is our CEO, Dr. Bernice A. King. Welcome, welcome, welcome to this very important subject. This particular panel is one that is near and dear to my heart. We're going to be talking about educating and disciplining our emotions. And it's very critical when we talk about this year's theme. When we talk about cultivating the beloved community mindset to transform unjust systems, how can we do that unless we educate and discipline our emotions? So this is going to be a very great conversation. We have some extraordinary panelists here to join us in having this conversation. And we're going to ground this conversation in Dr. King's quotes. And as we talk through this panel, I want you to think about a few quotes from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. One of the quotes that he said, we must forever conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline. I want you to think about that, conducting ourselves on a higher plane. And so getting to that higher plane is going to require us educating and disciplining our emotions. Another quote that I want to ground us in for this particular session is, man must evolve, for all human conflict, a method which rejects, hear this word, rejects revenge, aggression, and retaliation. The foundation of such method is love. And so in order for us to live a life where we're rejecting revenge and aggression and retaliation, how can we do that unless we educate and discipline our emotions? So we're going to jump in. I'm so excited. I'm ready to bring on our guest because we're going to have a phenomenal time. First up, we have Associate Professor of Smith College. We have Dr. Loretta J. Moss. Welcome, Dr. Ross. We have author and activist Marianne Williamson. Welcome, Marianne Williamson. And we have someone that I love dearly and know, and he's trained me in nonviolence. We have the senior Nonviolence 365 trainer, Mr. Charles Alphen. Welcome. Just a quick check-in. How's everyone doing this evening? I'm going to start with you, Dr. Ross. How are you doing this evening?
I'm having a great time. I'm in Massachusetts and it's snowing now. So I wish I was still in my home in Atlanta, but it's all good.
Oh, well, I love the snow. So, but it can be challenging too, but thank you, Dr. Ross. Thank you for joining us. Marianne Williamson, where are you stationed, and welcome, and how are you doing this afternoon?
Well, thank you. I am in Washington, D.C. I'm doing very well. I was very moved by Bernice's talk that you just showed us. All's good, and it's nice to be with a group like this and to be reminded how many of us there are who are thinking in very like-minded ways. It gives a person a lot of hope about what's possible in terms of creating and exerting political will to make change. So thank you for having me.
And thank you for being with us today. And Mr. Alphen, how are you doing this afternoon?
I am fantastic and just honored to be here to share with the world, the global world, and also to listen to other people who are doing things that will create this beloved community, because we're now in a situation where we've got to look at nonviolence or non-existence. So this is a very key summit, a very key topic, and I'm interested in learning how we can network together and build coalitions to address some of the solutions. So I'm fantastic.
Good. Thank you all. And on behalf of Dr. Bernice A. King, our CEO, we truly appreciate you taking the time to join us today. And this is a very important topic. When we talked about this year's theme, one of the things that Dr. King said is that I want to be very intentional about the mindset. Because if we don't deal with the mindset to create the beloved community, then we are going to miss the mark, because we have to begin to shift our minds. And part of that is learning how to deal with our emotions. So let's talk about, what does it mean to discipline and educate our emotions? Let's just have a conversation about that. Who wants to jump in first? Kind of share with us from your perspective, what does that really mean to educate, and the operative word, and discipline? Well, I'm going to call somebody's name then. Dr. Ross, why don't you share with us first? What does it mean to you when we say educate and discipline our emotions?
I have to honestly say that I have a quick temper, And my first impulse when I see injustice is to call it out, to publicly shame and blame whoever's doing that injustice as a way to hold them accountable and to stop the harm. But I've since learned through trying to discipline my emotions that I make much more headway with the person if I call myself in first, stay calm, and not fail to see them in their fullness of their humanity as well as I want to be seen. And this is so important for me because I believe as human rights activists in the legacy of Dr. King, because he called on us to build this human rights movement in his last Sunday sermon, March 31st, 1968. That means that everybody has the same human rights. And we must really work to understand that how we do the work is as important as the work that we do. We can't violate people's human rights, calling ourselves protecting people's human rights.
Yeah.
And so dealing with our emotions is going to be really required because so often we just want to punish and harm people who we think have done wrong. And yet that doesn't win us the victories that we want. That just makes us replicate the oppression that we're fighting.
Yeah. Marianne?
Well, as Loretta said, who we are is as important as what we do, because ultimately everything we do is infused with the consciousness with which we do it. As Gandhi said, the end is inherent in the means. Dr. King said we need quantitative shifts in our circumstances, but also qualitative shifts in our souls. So as I see it, Loretta already was talking about the anger, and you see a lot of anger on the left, and particularly today. And I think Dr. King was our role model for someone whose dignity, as he mentioned in that quote, the dignity, the plane, he said, God told me, he said, I have to love my enemies. He didn't say I have to like them. He did not come across with contempt. He said that you have very little morally persuasive power with people who can feel your underlying contempt. And I think that if he had not embodied that so much, I don't think he would have aroused the conscience. Remember, he wasn't just speaking, if Dr. King had just spoken to the choir, the changes that needed to happen would not have been able to occur. He was able to change other people's hearts. He saw everything as an opportunity for moral persuasion. So I think, as Loretta said, the issue of the anger on the left is big, but I think there's something else. We have become, in our society, too precious. If I hear one more person say, oh, what's happening has me traumatized. You know what I always say to that? You think the people who were walking across the bridge at Selma were not traumatized? You think our ancestors weren't traumatized by all the work for social justice they had to do? Do you think that they wasn't making them feel anxious? This idea that, oh, we're so anxious, oh, we're so traumatized. We have to toughen up in this generation. The factors and the institutional resistance, which has no intent, there's nothing new going on here. What's happening in our time is just a reiteration of exactly what was going on when people didn't want desegregation, when they didn't want abolition, when they didn't want the establishment of suffrage for women. It has been with us since the beginning of our founding. People who, for their own economic interests, had no intention of seeing the higher dreams of justice actualized. They have been pushed back by our ancestors. They need to be pushed back by us. And they will not be pushed back by people who indulge our anger or who indulge our sensitivity to such an extent that we're not as tough as we need to be. And to me, that's what Dr. King represents, that mix. Remember what he said? He said, power without love is reckless and abusive, but love without power is weak and anemic. So to me, the discipline that's necessary is to find within ourselves, I'm going to be loving, I'm going to be classy, I'm going to be sophisticated, I'm not going to attack you, but man, you're going to get it from every ounce of my being that what you represent has got to stop. For the sake of my children and the sake of my grandchildren, you did it to my grandparents and you're not going to do it to my kids. We have to find that within ourselves. And once again, we couldn't have a better role model than Martin Luther King.
Wow. Mr. Alphen, I know that
Wow.
was, yeah.
Oh.
and Marianne almost jumped to our end when we're going to start talking about applying those principles. But that was powerful. You can't help
Powerful.
but talk
Yeah.
about it and also assert the principles. But Mr. Alphen, can you kind of share with us
Very.
from your perspective?
Yeah, very passionate too, Marianne and Dr. Ross. Well, I'll be a little transparent. I come from a violent situation, and I was angry, and my emotions when I was coming up as an African American male. I didn't like the United States or what they were doing to me and my father. They tried to hang me when I was young. My emotions were to blame and shame, like Dr. Ross said. And I've done a lot of things that I'm ashamed of. But when I begin to understand that you control your emotions and your emotions can get you in trouble, your emotions can be counterproductive, but you need your emotions. And so I've learned through the King Center, the training of Mrs. Coretta Scott King and others, Andy Young and people, that emotions are good, but you have to focus your emotions so they become constructive. And that's what the key is the inner being, what's inside you. And then within that, controlling your emotions, the process. And in that process, you have to have humility, forgiveness, humanity, and it's persistent and passionate, like I see in Mary Ann. So therefore, we don't want to say you don't want to have your emotions, but you need to now discipline them so you don't become what you're fighting against. And if you're not careful, you'll become the person and the things that you're fighting against, because your emotions will move you into that negativity and won't solve a lot. It'll get you into a lot of problems, especially as a police officer. I'm a retired captain in St. Louis City. You have to really maintain those emotions. Otherwise, you can get in seriously trouble, or you can escalate the problem with your emotions.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, you both, Loretta, Dr. Ross, and you, Mr. Alphen, you kind of touched on something when you're talking about educating and disciplining your emotions. We are in a very polarized time in our country, and it gets really hard when you're seeing injustices across this nation and things that are happening. So what do we say to young people in that regard? Because I hear what we're saying, and it sounds good, but you see young people who are being faced with this, and we see a 6-year-old that had a gun in their hand. How do we begin to train our young people when we talk about educating? What does that look like for a young person to help them become healthy? And to your point, Mr. Alvin, not ignoring our emotions, because they do serve us. So how can we share with them how emotions should serve us well, and then B, explain to them the power in mastering their emotions? Can you, Dr. Ross, you were kind of hitting on that. Can you kind of elaborate a little bit more, and then we'll just go around?
Well, young people are totally immersed in what we call the call-out culture, where they are bitterly criticizing each other, right? For what they think someone has done wrong, and they want to hold them accountable for it. But instead of using love and respect, they're using anger, blaming, and shaming as the punishment. And what this is doing, I don't know who's having a drill right now, but what this is doing is making people afraid to speak up in defense of justice and truth, for fear that they don't know the right words, that they don't have the right lingo, that they aren't woke enough to use that phrase that the right user likes to talk about. And so they're self-censoring themselves, and they feel like they're walking around on verbal eggshells. There's a corollary to this that Marianne was talking about, where they enter the human rights movement thinking that it's going to serve as their personal therapy space, instead of a place where you conduct righteous struggle against injustice. And so that's why I've spent the last 7 years of my life teaching people how to call people in instead of calling people out. Because you can achieve accountability through love and respect. But if somebody feels that you don't respect them, they're not going to listen to anything you've ever got to say to them. And it's a testament to your own integrity when you lead with love and respect. And like Charles said, with forgiveness and grace, all of these things matter. So that's what I'm teaching to young people, because I think calling in is going to be as important to the human rights movement in the 21st century as nonviolence was to the civil rights movement in the 20th century. It's going to be a testament of our integrity, a testament of our values, and proof that we are capable of building a better world for humanity.
And Dr. Ross, if we could just get that to go across the screen, I don't know if we have the technical capabilities to do that right now, but calling people in and not calling people out, that's essential because we're in a cancel culture. And so, and just tag teaming with Dr. Ross, Marianne, can you kind of graduate the conversation and let's talk about that, but also looking at this cancel culture, because to your point, people are calling people out, and to your point earlier, Marianne, people are so sensitive, we get shattered and we can't have conversations without people wanting to be canceled, and it's just an extreme cancel culture. So how do we begin to deal with emotions in such a way that we are not kicking people out the beloved community by canceling them instead of calling them into a higher place?
You know, you were talking about disciplining our emotions, and it always impacts me that the word discipline and the word disciple come from the same root. There is a level of personal discipleship to whatever your image of God as love is. To be a disciple means to demonstrate the love that you feel would heal the world. If you're saying that you want love to heal the world, but you yourself are demonstrating something other than love, then once again, as we've all been saying here, you're only going to get people who already agree with you to agree with you. And so you're really not making it, working to expand the movement one way or the other. In terms of younger people, I think those of us who are no longer young have to be very careful. It doesn't work to start scolding the young or instructing the young these days. They look at us and see us, and they're absolutely correct to see us as having failed in some very fundamental ways. I think that they sometimes lack perhaps a compassion for us. We lost Martin, we lost Bobby, our heroes were shot and killed in front of our eyes. I think those of us who are not young kind of understand how we became stymied. But the point is, we did not end up creating some of the structures and some of the systemic improvements that have earned the respect of young people. So in my experience, if I just start telling them how they need to be, I get a lot of okay, boomer attitude. On the other hand, if they can see us trying to demonstrate, that's the way we teach, is through demonstration. My concern about young people today is not just the cancel culture and all of that. All of that's true. It has to do with social media. It has to do with a lot of the things that we all know, gratuitous violence and TV, video games, etc. But I'm actually concerned about something else, and that is just how nihilistic they're all becoming. Not all, but how the kids are giving up. Young people are giving up. They don't have an institutional memory. Everybody on this phone call has an institutional memory of a time when Martin was alive, Bobby was alive. There was a serious social justice movement, and sometimes the social justice movements won. A lot of these young people never saw it, never saw the good guys win in the ways that some of us at least had moments. So for me, I feel the biggest gift I can give to the young right now is to demonstrate that we're still trying, we're still working on it, it's worth doing. Because if I just start telling them how I think they ought to do it, I feel a block. But if they see me out there, come on, we can do it, we can make this happen, and they see us generating energy, then I think that's what they want from us. They're like every other generation, they want role models. And that's what I think is so important, is that we demonstrate, as Martin, of course, demonstrated, as Bobby demonstrated, and so forth, the way to do it. And we were young. One of the things I've felt about the death of Martin Luther King, I always feel this about the death of Bobby Kennedy, too. Usually in your life, if someone you love died, every year it's a little easier. I always feel like every year at the anniversary of the assassinations of both Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King, that every year it's worse, because everything we feared would happen has happened. Everything we feared would happen with them gone has happened. But it has also occurred to me, it has occurred to me just in the last few years, even if Martin Luther King had lived, he'd be an old man now. it would be time for us to say, Martin, you can rest. We'll take it from here. And so that's what I think we need to do, is to generate among ourselves and with each other. Come on, guys, this is our last shot. This is our chapter 3. Let's lay it down. And the kids will see that. To me, that's the greatest gift, to demonstrate to the kids that we can still do this. We can still repudiate forces of justice. We're going to do it the right way, but we're going to do it, and we're not going to lay down and just die and let them have the country.
And I'm glad you said that. I often, I've repented to young people on many occasions, even though I'm a Gen Zer. I still, that's a joke. I've repented to young people, because I do believe that we have so much to do, so much to make up for, and we somewhere our attention got misdirected, and we didn't give them some of the things that our great grandparents and our grandparents and our parents gave us. But I want to give you an opportunity to chime in here, Mr. Alphen. I keep thinking about Mrs. King's quote when she said, struggle is a never ending process. Freedom is never really won. You earn it and win it in each generation. And so we still have an opportunity in this generation to win for the next generation. So when we think about educating and disciplining our emotions, to Mary Ann's point, what gift can we give? What win can we give? What tangible examples can we give for them in this process, so that they can be equipped to really transform unjust systems, so that they can deal with their anger, they can deal with all this that they see on social media and all the bullying and even the suicidal thoughts. There's so much that's going on. How can we, to Mary Ann's point, give the gift of example when it comes to disciplining and educating our emotions?
Mm-hmm. Well, I like what both of the people said, and I'd like to elaborate and go a little deeper, because there's a reason why our young people are where they are. And Dr. King said in the 60s, we need a revolution of values. Mm-hmm. Therefore, our values have eroded, and we have participated with that erosion. We have not told them our history. I work with young people, in fact, yesterday. They don't know our history. They don't really know what Dr. King was doing and how our system works, because they're angry and frustrated, but they're fighting at the wrong battle. They're fighting and looking at the wrong building to knock down. And they don't know where to go. And then they get frustrated because when nothing changes, then they want to change, they want to turn to more violence. So I think my value in this is to listen and don't talk about the old time, the good old time. I don't know what the good old times were. So we need to let that alone, listen to them, and ask them questions like, how would you improve your quality of life? What we do in the training is, Benita, we want the people to tell us from their mouth what we're trying to say. When they tell us from their mouth, it means it's much more powerful. But if we keep, like Mary Ann says, telling them, we turn them off. The police tells them, the teachers, the parents tell them, and the quickest way to turn them off is to go in there and try to tell them something. They're very anxious to solve this mess, but they don't know how. And they're very anxious to learn the process that Dr. King used in nonviolence, because most people don't understand nonviolence. They think it's passive and turn the other cheek, and they have no understanding of how they can begin to deal with social education. So I think, number one, the people that we need to look at to blame are ourselves, because we didn't teach our young people what we knew. And we thought they'd learn through osmosis. So we've got to go back to institutionalizing this in the schools, in the church, in the community, and tell them how Dr. King, give them success stories. Once they hear a success story and they understand the freedoms that they enjoy in the day because people suffered and died, they will join in, but it's patience. It's not going to be a quick fix. And it's not going to be your idea, because your idea may not be what they want. So we have to be listening, and also lead from the rear, I call leading from the rear. And therefore, these young people are exposed to so much, and they're so ahead of us that we cannot drag our feet and say, we want you to learn and learn history. We got to bring history to 2023 and make it relevant.
Thank you so much for that. So I want to kind of shift to, how do we get to the beloved community? One of our vision here at the King Center is the beloved community. It's a world where injustices cease and love prevails. So when you think about that in this year's theme, it starts with me cultivating the beloved community mindset to transform unjust systems. So when we think about cultivating a beloved community mindset, we're thinking about a place where injustices cease and love prevails. How does, to your point, the means are very important. So how do we apply educating and disciplining our emotions to cultivate that mindset? How essential is that, and how do we do that, the practicality behind it? So Mr. Alphen, let's start with you this time. How do yeah, we're gonna let you, yeah, when we talk about cultivating a beloved community mindset, how do we apply this topic?
First of all,
yeah.
I think Dr. King wrote a book, Bernice King. It starts with you. In this process, and I'll talk my personal conversion from violence to understanding Dr. King, I had to get inside me and see what I was about and what my values were and why I was here. What was my purpose being here? And I had to do an analysis of my values. I had to do an analogy of my biases, where they came from, and how I had to do an analysis of what could be a successful way of me to achieving all the things that I saw were wrong. So therefore, I think it begins with you, and it's very, very difficult because we don't want to face ourselves. Michael Jackson says, the man in the mirror, the woman in the mirror. We have to look in the mirror and begin to go and do it internally first. And we have to look at all the things we do in a day's time that are violence with our people we say we love in the workforce, in the community, and give an audit at the end of the day of how do we, are we expecting humanity, respecting humanity? Are we forgiving? Or are we revengeful? Are we vindictive? All those things you have to get inside you first to understand. How I did it was reading Dr. King and Gandhi. That changed me because now I had a goal. And in a conflict, you have to have a goal. So if your goal is to embarrass somebody or to read them out, that's what you're going to do. But if your goal is to help people, because people who think negatively, that some people are not as important as other people, they're sick and they need to be helped. So your process is to help people get healed. That's the beloved community. So therefore, you have to change your whole thinking pattern. And it has to be done every day. You have to read and understand that you have something that's higher than your head. There's something in faith. Dr. King called it faith. But everything can't stop with your top of your head. And it takes you to get ready first before you go out and try to change other people. And I started in my family first, and then I took it out. So it's a process that you have to have forgiveness. Now I'll end up with Dr. King's forgiveness was a little bit different from other people's forgiveness. He said that forgiveness is when you have a conflict and you don't let that conflict create barriers in your future relationships. So forgiveness is like, well, I'll forgive you, but I won't forget. That's not Dr. King. Dr. King's forgiveness said, I will forgive you, and I will not let what happened be a barrier to our future relationship. And that's hard to do. So that's a little bit of getting started.
Mary Ann?
Well, what Charles said was true for me as well, reading Gandhi and King. And of course, Gandhi said, we must be the change. Early in my career in speaking about politics, people felt my anger. People felt I was scolding them. That's not the way to change people's hearts. And much as Charles said, I had to see where I have not forgiven. And this is an ongoing process. I have to look at it every day. Dear God, make me gentle where I am harsh. Dear God, make me forgiving where I'm in judgment or blame. I think the left is really big on this kind of like superiority, come across kind of like, I'm superior to you because I have better values than you. But if I feel I'm superior to you, then I'm not practicing that. For me personally, prayer and meditation are everything. I think particularly if you are working in any kind of social justice context, and particularly today, it's hard, not only because the forces that are resisting real justice are so ubiquitous, but because the system itself, even within the Democratic Party, which we had traditionally thought was at least some level of container, we see it everywhere within the neoliberal establishment, that we're supposed to be excited if we get crumbs, and people are getting angrier and angrier about it. So for me, it's not just an intellectual change. It's not just, Marianne, be nicer. It's, dear God, please take away from me my sense of spiritual superiority, my sense of political superiority, my anger at those who do not agree with me, my sense of victimization. So for me, meditation and prayer are absolutely essential. I think a lot of times, to be honest, and Bernice has talked about this quite a bit, a lot of people within the social justice movement forget Dr. King was a preacher. And many of the, his politics were rooted in the gospel as he understood it. Many of the women who were the leaders of the suffragist movement were Quakers. Many of people in the abolitionist movement, there was a lot of activity from the early evangelicals even. The great social justice movements have been rooted in deep spiritual and religious conviction. And the fact that that is so absent in our day is actually the aberration. And I hope that we will go back. Dr. King was part of a great religious left in America when he was living. And I think that we should be unapologetic about the return of what we see as religious, spiritual, and moral values to our struggle for justice. In the absence of that conversation, look how the right wing has stolen it. We abdicated it, and they've sort of taken it up for themselves. So for me, prayer and meditation and my devotion to God are everything. Dr. King said the desegregation of the American South is the political externalization of the goal of the beloved community, of the civil rights movement, but the ultimate goal is the establishment of the beloved community. And I think we all know that has to first begin within our own hearts.
So Dr. Ross, cultivating. And if you could just really hone in on that word cultivating as we talk about getting to that beloved community mindset. How does educating and disciplining our emotions play a role in the cultivation?
I was very fortunate to have Reverend C.T. Vivian as my mentor. Reverend Vivian started the National Anti-Klan Network, where I was fortunate to work. And he used to come to the office all the time and say, if you ask people to give up hate, then you need to be there for them when they do.
Wow.
And when he first told me that, I didn't want to hear none of that, because I said, if the Klan hates Black people, I'm all right hating them back. But it took years for me to understand how profound that message was. And what it really took was me participating in helping to deprogram people who had been in that movement. And once I got to see them as human beings, then I couldn't hate them anymore. And it became kind of like my internal joke. Well, if a Black girl can't hate the Klan, who's left? I've run out of hatred. I've been my hate. And so I had to find another motivation for doing the work. And I listened to Reverend Vivian, and he assured me that love is the most powerful force that you'll ever need to do the work for justice. And I've been 30 years later, I'm still practicing that discipline of self-love, where it has to start before I can love anybody else. But I really do believe that there is a wonderful convergence happening. See, I don't feel pessimistic. I actually feel optimistic.
Me too.
Because we're seeing the last dying grasp of people who are demographically doomed. They can't even get their own young people to join them in their hate. I mean, if you look at the voting patterns of the 18 to 29-year-olds in the 2020 election and in the midterms, those were the first time young white voters broke with their parents, did not support white supremacy, chose to carve out a pathway for themselves, a thinking. And so I actually think we hold a winning hand, because The people who are opposed to human rights, they're opposed to forces that are way beyond their control because they're opposed to truth.
Mm.
They're opposed to evidence. They're opposed to history. And most of all, they're opposed to time
Yeah.
because they're trying to roll us back to the 19th century. So those of us who believe in human rights, since we've got truth, evidence, time, and history on our side, we hold a winning hand. But our biggest risk, in my opinion, is that we'll self-destruct on the way to victory with the call-out culture, without learning how to forgive each other and to self-forgive, because you got to forgive yourself before you can forgive each other. Not treating mistakes as fatal, because in doing this human rights work, you're always going to be making mistakes. Changing hearts and minds is harder than making someone float. So we're always going to be making mistakes. But as Reverend Vivian used to say, the power of love, when you see people's humanity and you treat them like you're holding their heart in your hand, you can get so much accomplished. I've worked with ex-Klansmen, ex-Nazis, former rapists. I mean, I've been through a lot with the most unlikely people. And I've found that when you go underneath their words and you speak to their values, you really can have really great and productive conversation if you don't stereotype them based on the words that you initially heard from them.
I want to dive into something you said because I think it's essential in educating and disciplining our emotion, and that is the reprogramming. So, how do we begin to educate ourselves in such a way where we understand how to dismantle and reprogram thoughts and emotions that don't serve us well to get to the place where we can identify those emotions and get to a healthy space so that those emotions can serve us well. I think that just deprogramming that you said is very critical. Let's kind of dive into that. How does one do that to get to a healthy space of educating your emotion? And then how do you turn that education to discipline until you get to a place where you begin to master your emotions so that they serve you well?
Well, I can tell you a story about that. I was in Tennessee at the invitation of some women whose husbands and partners were in the Ku Klux Klan. And they had invited me to do an anti-racist training. And it was all hush hush and secret because they would have gotten beaten and I could have gotten killed if words had gotten out about what we were doing. And in the middle of the training, and this was in the 1990s, in the middle of the training, they said, "You speak very well for a colored girl." And I had to count to 10, swallow whatever my first visceral reaction was to them saying that, and realize that we were there to serve a higher purpose than my immediate reaction to being called a colored girl in the 1990s, which I thought that just passed out of white consciousness, because it helped me remember that that's a step up from the N word for them. And so remembering who they were and the risk they were taking, even have this Black woman teaching anti-racist practices to them. So if you don't lose sight of the other person's humanity, you'll astonish yourself at how capable you are of seeing them as a human being.
That's a very powerful story.
Yeah.
And I think that what you have to do, what I did, a personal story, is you have to get out of your comfort level, your comfort zone. And you have to visit those people who you don't like or who you have opinions of or biases, because you have to speak to them and also see the issue from their eyesight, see how they became what they are, because deep down inside they're human beings. And if you can, Howard Thurman said, if you can just take the classification off the person, that's begin you can see them as a human being. So I think we have to get out of our little silos and begin to talk to people who don't think like us and begin to understand. Dr. King said, if you can't articulate your opponent's position just as well as you can yours and understand how they arrived, you're not ready to solve the problem. You can't try to solve the problem as you see the person or the condition. So therefore, I think the first thing you have to do is be courageous enough to shut down and not only hear, but listen to your opponent's position and begin to have the humility, like Dr. Ross says. When they go down deep down, we're really not changing people and training. We're taking them back to who they are as a human being. Circumstances has caused their actions to be like that. So our mindset has to be, I'm not trying to tell you how bad you are. I'm trying to help you be a human being and go back to who you are, because violence is out of character. And sometimes I would say that we don't know how to handle it because we can't get back to who we are as a human being. So I think it's all on you. And I would like to say, I think the major part, Bonita, is on you, because you can turn hate to love. It just depends on your attitude and how can you love a person that's not lovable? That's the key. Can you do that?
So to piggyback off that, Marianne, I'm just gonna role play here. I hear what Charles Alton is saying, but I'm still feeling this anger because this situation triggered me. So how do you begin to deal with those emotional triggers so that you are no longer responding in ways that don't serve you well and don't necessarily get the outcomes that you're trying to get because your emotions are still holding you hostage to behaviors that just don't serve you well?
No. They're not holding you hostage. You're choosing to indulge them. We have to be a little tougher with ourselves now. You mentioned the word emotional discipline. We're all wounded. We all have triggers. You come to the point where you make a decision whether or not to act from it. When Loretta told us that story, she told us, my first response was, how dare you call me that? But she had the emotional and behavioral discipline not to indulge that. You know, we've talked about the answers here. Charles has talked about reading, Gandhi and King. We've talked about prayer. We've talked about meditation. When you hear stories like Loretta's, oh, that's the way it occurred for some people. I think we have to repudiate this thing that's happened in our culture where we're too precious about our emotions. You think Dr. King never got angry or upset? You think Coretta never got angry or upset? Of course they did, but they did it in the safety of their own most sacred relationships, loving people, and they were disciplined about what they showed as part of the struggle. So I think we also have to include that in our conversation and stop, these days everything is, oh, how did you feel, you poor baby? I think we need to, in looking at our role models, such as the stories that like Loretta has told about what she went through, Charles, what he went through, and our ancestors, they felt it, they transformed it. At a certain point, you do it by deciding to do it and by not letting yourself off the hook. I think in my life, one of the biggest things for me that I had to come to understand is that I'm responsible for my effect. Mm-hmm. And if I'm going to act a certain way, I can't complain that other people didn't hear me. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, is part of what's going on today. We know what the answers are. The issue is whether or not we will do them. Once again, discipline.
Anita, what helped me?
Go ahead. Go ahead. We have 5 minutes, and I do want to make sure we just apply nonviolence in that emotion.
I want to shift. What helped me was that I was in the police department. I've been through sensitivity training, multicultural, and all that. It didn't help me. When I heard this in 1981, Ms. Coretta Scott King and C.T. Vivian and Andrew Young, it told me, Dr. King's principle said, if you want to do this, this is how you do it. The principles are the guardrails. And in any situation you're in, you look at those principles, and if you adhere to all 6 of those principles, that begins to focus you on your activity. And the 6 steps begin to make it mobile and make mobilize it. So therefore, I think the answer is to understand Dr. King, who lived this, who went through the Montgomery bus boycott before he wrote these principles. So it was live, it was human, it was a human experience, and it works in your relationship with your wife or your children, in the community. So therefore, the 6 principles are the guardrails, and will answer that question you asked.
And I thank you for that, Mr. Alton, because I want to give Dr. Ross and Marianne an opportunity to kind of share the role that nonviolence plays for you in educating and disciplining your emotion. If you could take about 30 seconds, 60 seconds, we're about to wrap up, but I think it's critically important because Mr. Alpha can probably testify to my own, evolution here, because it truly, truly helped me to discipline my emotion through nonviolence, because it's a love-centered way of thinking, speaking, acting, and engaging, and it transformed you. So Marianne and Dr. Ross, if you could share very quickly how nonviolence plays a role in educating and disciplining our emotions.
Marianne?
In 1998, I published a book called Healing the Soul of America, and I was interested in the intersection of politics and spirituality. And that's when I read Gandhi, that's when I read Dr. King, how much I realized that this wheel had already been invented. These things have been mentioned. There's a book by Dr. King, The Testament of Hope, all his collected speeches, just open it anywhere. I'm a student of A Course in Miracles, whatever one's spiritual path is. You find your discipline and you practice it. And on any given day, I, like anyone else, am tempted, whether it's getting snarky, getting whatever, getting annoyed, whatever. And I think at this point, we should be saying less to one another, oh, poor baby, how do you feel today? And more, developing the habit to say, what great thing are you trying to do today to make the world a better place, and how can I help you? And when we start just changing and leaning into those changes in behavior, as we change our behavior, our feelings begin to change.
Dr. Ross?
For me, it has been a constant struggle to remind myself on a daily basis that I'm always more than what happened to me. And I refuse to let the hate violence I've experienced, the sexual violence I've experienced, the racial violence I've experienced determine the content of my character. And I had to learn that as a child, and I practice it every day. And somebody more famous than me said, your reputation is what other people think that they know about you, but your integrity is what you know about yourself. And so I give a lot of intentionality to my integrity so that I don't get defined by what happened to me. I define myself by the amount of love I can offer to people.
I'd like to say one little thing adjunct to that as well. I've learned what to ignore. You don't have to take in what everybody says about you. You don't have to read everything on Twitter. You learn that there's some real poison out there. There's some real toxicity out there. Some of it will be directed at you. You learn that it's okay to ignore certain things. And to me, that's part of the discipline.
Listen, on behalf of our CEO and our King Center Beloved community family, I want to thank each of you for joining us today. This is a very critical conversation, and I hope people took some real golden nuggets from you, Dr. Ross, just kind of swallowing it and thinking about what that person is and remembering their humanity. And from you, Marianne, understanding that how you handle those means are very critical to your outcome. So they exist within your outcome. You can't get a positive outcome using negative tools to get their methods. And Mr. Alphen, for us all to understand that those principles can ground us to creating and cultivating the beloved community mindset. And one more critical thing, Marianne, I like the decision, because in every moment we're making a decision, and you could choose violence or you could choose violence. You could choose love or you could choose hate. You can choose to live on the higher plane of justice. So thank you all for your time and your commitment to moving humanity forward. We send so much love your way. Have an awesome day. Thank you so much.
Lovely meeting all of you. Thank you. God bless you.
God bless.
Nonviolence is the answer to the crucial political and moral questions of our time. The need for man to overcome oppression and violence without resorting to violence and oppression. Man must evolve for all human conflict a method which rejects revenge, aggression, and retaliation. The foundation of such a method is love.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. changed the world when he demonstrated what could be achieved through nonviolence. Now, you can learn how to live and practice this philosophy yourself through Nonviolence 365 Online, an innovative digital experience developed by the Martin Luther King Jr. Center for Nonviolent Social Change. Nonviolence 365 Online features extensive video interviews with real nonviolence practitioners, including the King Center CEO Dr. Bernice A. King, King Center certified instructors and trainers, and veterans of the civil rights movement. Explorations of the historic campaigns that helped Dr. King forge his philosophy. Immersive, annotated reading experiences that enhance Dr. King's most influential writings on nonviolence. Custom activities, including quizzes and interactive scenarios to help you practice along the way. Real-world exercises to help you start applying nonviolence in your daily life. Nonviolence 365 is a love-centered way of thinking, speaking, engaging, and acting that leads to personal, cultural, and societal transformation. It isn't just a concept for philosophers or political leaders. Nonviolence 365 is a powerful, practical approach to dealing with conflict and dismantling injustice. Whether it's in your personal life, in your school or workplace, your local community, or a national movement. Dr. King, Mrs. Coretta Scott King, and many others sought to create the beloved community, a society built on global cooperation and equity. This wasn't a lofty utopian dream. It's a realistic and achievable goal because each and every one of us has the power to make it happen by committing to nonviolence as a way of life. Take the first step today with Nonviolence 365 Online.
Hi, I'm Dr. Bernice A. King.
And I'm Dr. Kimberly P. Johnson.
And we are the co-authors of
It Starts With Me. Well, it starts with me.
No, I think it really starts with me.
No.
Well, maybe it just starts with you.
It starts with you.
This is a book for children and the rest of the world about love. A powerful word that really can change and transform our world. Now, this girl here is Amora. So Amora is going to take us on a journey around the world with her friends, talking about how we can be loved.
Thank you so much for reading this book. It Starts With Me. Dr. King's vision is coming to life, and you guys are going to carry that vision into the world. Have fun reading.
We want our children and you parents to be loved in the way you speak, in the way you act, and in the way you think. That's what it starts with me about. It starts with me. I am the one who infects the world with love.
It starts with me.
So, my brothers and my sisters, as we embrace this urgency of creating the beloved community, now is the time to be loved. Love means understanding, redemptive goodwill toward all which seeks nothing in return. So be loved by implementing the demands of justice to eliminate the school to prison pipeline that has so many black children entrapped. Be loved by correcting voting policies that seek to suppress the votes of millions of black and brown people. Be loved and implement the demands of justice by transforming a society that is disproportionately violent toward black lives, including black transgendered lives and indigenous lives. Be loved and correct false narratives and economic policies that continue to divide and pit poor and working class black and white people against each other. Be loved and implement demands of justice where systems and structures are deconstructed and lead the way of living in community that reimagines just, humane, equitable, and sustainable policies, practices, and behaviors. Love your enemies. Bless them that curse you. Do good to them who hate you, and pray for them that despitefully use you and abuse you. Be loved and do justice and love mercy and walk humbly with our God.
The Martin Luther King Jr. federal holiday is a day on to educate, advocate, activate. The King holiday extends beyond the one day and beyond the United States to encompass global, comprehensive, strategic work to eradicate the triple evils of poverty, extreme materialism, racism, and militarism to create the beloved community.
As recent events have shown us, we cannot wait. The most pressing issues of our time demand that humanity envision, strategize, and organize toward a more just, humane, equitable, and peaceful society with nonviolence as the pathway to that world.
We encourage people across the globe to use the MLK holiday and the days following as a way to engage in meaningful service, to advance the important work of groups, organizations, and entities that are engaged in initiatives to address systemic issues that have created disparity and perpetuated inequality.
What are we celebrating on MLK Day?
We are really remembering and reflecting upon a gentleman who gave us a means of coexisting together as a humanity. You know, how do we really get along and cooperate with all of these different beliefs and ideologies? That's really what we're commemorating.
President Reagan made Martin Luther King Day official at a Rose Garden ceremony today. Mr. Reagan had expressed early reservations about honoring the slain civil rights leader with a national holiday, but he signed the bill that had passed both the House and Senate by large margin.
In 1994, Congress passed the King Holiday and Service Act.
This celebration of Dr. King will now be a celebration of his vision of community, his vision of service, and his life proves that it will work for all Americans and for our country.
The bill was introduced by Congressman John Lewis and Senator Harris Warford, both of whom worked alongside Dr. King in civil rights activism. Participation in the MLK Day of Service has grown steadily over the past decade, with hundreds of thousands of Americans each year engaging in projects such as tutoring and mentoring children, painting schools and senior centers, delivering meals, building homes, and reflecting on Dr. King's life and teachings.
It's time to put ego and pride and fear and power aside and employ love and justice. My father reminds us that power at its best is love, implementing the demands of justice. And justice at its best is love correcting everything that stands against love.
Community engagement also includes initiatives in the form of peaceful protest, awareness and education projects, and philanthropy efforts to address critical health, education, human service, human rights, and environmental needs. We want this engagement to continue beyond the holiday and for volunteers to commit to having impact in their communities year-round.
So these young people are being prepared differently than I was because they live in a different time. But the most important thing they have to decide is not just to get an education and to be selfish about it, but that they must prepare themselves to give back and to make a difference in the world. We have to create what my husband called the beloved community. If we are to survive, we have to learn how to solve our problems and resolve our conflicts in a nonviolent manner. And so I think it's important for them to realize that they have a personal responsibility.
The MLK Day is a defining moment when many commit to service. We believe it will spark continual volunteerism that is strategic and impactful for the greater good, so we can build resilient, equitable, and sustainable communities worldwide.
Wow, Dr. Ross, what an amazing
Cameron!
day. Oh
It has
my
been an
goodness.
amazing day. Oh my gosh, starting with you at the very beginning, watching you just come out on stage and you and Fly together. Oh my goodness, it was so amazing. I am so delighted to be in this space with you today, Cameron.
Yeah, this is by far the King Center's busiest time of the year. We have so many different things that are happening, and it's an amazing honor to have the opportunity to pull off the summit. There's a tremendous amount of work that goes on behind the scenes, from the people that do the production, the people that are putting the stage and stuff together, the people that are organizing and making the calls and building the relationships. It is a collective effort. And honestly, Dr. Ross, we have to embody the beloved community in the World House ourselves as we're doing this.
That's exactly right. I was just thinking that's a microcosm, right? Because, in nonviolence, we don't all play the same role. And every single role is important. And even if we can't do this role, then we all have a role to play. And it's figuring out how we plug in. Even in that last panel, when we were hearing about it's a practice and something that we need to do continually. We started the day with Sierra Fly Bobo. And, our theme is it starts with me. Cultivating a beloved community mindset that transforms unjust systems. And one way that I do that, I want to brag on Fly a little bit. This is a jacket. If you can see my words, it says beloved community. And it's not just swirls. It's actually people holding hands. And I wear this because it's important to me that we embody it, that we actually put on love, that we show up in love. And I think today has been phenomenal. I've taken pages and pages of notes. I think we need probably about 8 hours to debrief the 8 hours that I just saw. But what stood out most to you, Cameron?
Yeah, I know. This is the third annual Beloved Community Global Summit. So just the fact that we've even got to number 3 is amazing. And so what stood out is when we began today, we have made our theme, it starts with me. So what is this personalizing of nonviolence, personalizing the mission, making it something that I have to commit to myself? And so I cannot, as Dr. West talked about and as Sierra Fly Bobo talked about, I cannot transform the world unless my mind is transformed by interacting with nonviolence and the leadership principles that Dr. King laid out for us. And so we had an opportunity, Ross, to begin with the Beloved Community Global Youth Summit, where students engage in tremendous discussion and they learn what it means to practice MB365. And so even hearing the comments that the students made about their experience, and even those that may not have been familiar with nonviolence, they knew who Dr. King was, but what exactly does nonviolence mean for me? It was honestly tremendous to hear their perspective on how the world is impacting them and how they want to impact the world in a nonviolent way.
Yes. And then the other panels, when we, it's this theme of love, which when we just saw the promotional video for MB365 online, Dr. King said the foundation of such a method, the foundation of nonviolence is love. That's in our King Center definition. It's a love-centered way of thinking and speaking, engaging and acting. And how powerful that is, that it started with the youth and then wove through when we heard about dignity, when we heard about folks talking about leaning in, being curious, not calling people out, but calling people in. Just such a powerful movement throughout, that it truly is a global summit, that it's not just how are we going to transform Atlanta.
Yeah. What's so amazing about it is that even during the youth summit today, the students got introduced, many of them for the first time, to 6 principles and 6 steps. Now, Rod, we have heard these so often. We have used them in our teachings, our engagements so often that I think for many of us, it becomes a part of our DNA. But one of the things that was stressed to the students is that this is a lifelong process.
That's right.
You don't just hear about MB365 and nonviolence and immediately it becomes a part of who you are. No, you have to learn it. You got to spend time with it. It's like a relationship. You have to give to that relationship every single day. And an amazing thing that happened today, some of our students were expressing that COVID, racism, political turmoil, school shootings, that makes them angry. And they feel those things. That hurts them. But something that nonviolence does such a great job of is that it helps us to utilize our emotions, utilize our anger, and again, use it in a nonviolent manner that helps us to be effective and not to be destructive when we're doing work in the world. So again, that's an amazing point, because it's important for kids especially to realize that your emotions matter, who you are matters, and that stuff doesn't need to be discarded for you to have a place in doing the work of justice.
Exactly. Exactly. One of the things also that I heard were these talking points, obviously cultivating the beloved community mindset. And we talked we talked about that a lot in each of those panels. What does that mindset mean? But it's committing to broadening our loyalty. How is it that we're showing up in love? And then building those coalitions and partnerships. So just like you said, we started at the very beginning where these students are really frustrated and they're really angry, but they could look in the room, and then as we are joining around the globe, we can see it's not just us. It starts with me, and that mindset, that's up to me. However, we're building these coalitions and these partnerships. And, you know, like if you listen to so many of the organizations that were represented today, the foundation was very similar. Their causes and their focuses were very similar because we're aligned. And that's what coalition building is all about. And that's what Dr. King did in nonviolence.
Exactly. Yeah. So again, the student got a chance to get introduced to MV365. The youth summit today was concluded with remarks from Dr. King, and she basically shared with students the importance of protecting your mind and your eyes and your ears, and how those are the pathways to what feeds you. And what feeds you is what's going to help you grow. She talked about this idea of being aware of different forms of violence, and that your tongue can sometimes be the harshest weapon. And what I love about Dr. Bernice A. King, CEO of the Kingston, the youngest daughter of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Mrs. Coretta Scott King, is that she has such a way with communicating why things matter. Yes. Why it matters what you listen to, why it matters what you're feeding yourself. Because you know what, Dr. Raj, you could want to do all the good in the world, but if you're not feeding yourself with good thoughts, with good spirits, with things that will help you and benefit you as a human being, that make you more reflective, that make you more humane, that make you more justice centered, then you can't give that thing out to the world, because whatever it is you receive, that is what you're going to get. Right. And so she did such a great job of articulating that today.
Yes. As you can see behind me, I mean, these are some of the books that I have that are about nonviolence and about that were written by Dr. King and Mrs. King. And I study nonviolence an hour a day. And people say, how can you spend an hour a day doing something? An hour a day is 4% of my day. That's it. So, you know, you can really dig in and say, how am I going to spend this hour? And you're exactly right. When you're taking it in, then what goes in is what comes out. And it's so much easier to be loving, to overlook a snarky comment, to overlook even someone who is being quite angry or quite ugly to me. If I can then say, tell me your story, how powerful that is. But it does take that transforming our mindset to be able to do that, to be able to invite that person in.
Absolutely. And Dr. Ross, you tell me, I think that one of the things that's so unique about young people is that they know what's happening in the world because they're aware, they're smart, and there's such zeal they have. They want to be change agents. They want to be global influencers. But Dr. Ross, what is it you think about young people that makes them so bold in wanting to be the people that are helping to cause that change in the world?
You know, I think that's an excellent question, Cameron. I think the main thing is that they are all interconnected through the web, through digital, through social media, and it's demonstrating our interconnectedness. And I think they understand the power of interconnectedness, that somebody like me, I'm 52. I didn't grow up with that. And I grew up in a bubble. And, you know, one of our panels was about unlearning and relearning. You know, a 52-year-old has a lot of unlearning to do. If you grow up in a white bubble, that there's some history there that I wasn't taught. And so then it's like, okay, but they already understand that. They understand that what they do today in terms of recycling or words or other ways, that is impacting their brother or their sister in China, in Korea. And I think I was one of the panels, and they're a little bit blurring together for me, but one of them said, there are people who say the future looks so bleak. And then another panelist said, absolutely, I hear that, but for me, the future is so bright. To me, when I look at those young people, I could not wait to hear your panel, because I knew that those young people were going to be fired up and saying, this is what we need to do. This is that next generation that we want to teach and inform. And that last panel about education, so incredibly powerful.
Right. Absolutely agree. So again, the Youth Summit was exceptional today. It was amazing. Please, I urge you, go back and watch it if you have not had the opportunity. You get to hear from students that have been a part of the Beloved Community Leadership Academy as well, which is an exceptional program run by Mr. Ian Moore. He has done an incredible job with that program. The students, they are committed, they are bought in, they believe, and they want to be global leaders. And so Dr. Ross, I know you had a chance to work with them. I know many of our trainers have had a chance to work with them. So it was excellent. But then Dr. Ross, finally to close the day as we transition, we had the General Summit that began with words from Dr. King about why mindset matters and the thinking that transforms the individual, communities, and system. Dr. Ross, What did you think about that?
Yes. Well, that goes back to the King Center definition. And it leads to personal, nonviolence leads to personal, and then cultural, and then societal transformation. So evidently it does start with me, right? And so it's making sure that I'm committed to being the absolute best, most loving person that I can be, showing up in love, and then understanding that I am impacting those around me and then the society at large. Seeing what it is that I want to be a part of cultivating. I like the word cultivating because how, just the powerful fruition to that. And, when we plant a seed, we do not reap a seed. When we plant a seed, we reap a tree that is full of a billion seeds, right? Lots of fruit with lots of seeds. And cultivating is such a beautiful word.
I love that, Dr. Frost. Cultivate. The idea of bringing something together and then you have to help it grow, help it fester. That is absolutely amazing. Y'all, and then as well, we had Dr. King partnered with Jill Savage from the National Center for Civil and Human Rights. We had Karen Ryan from the Carter Center. They had a robust conversation that focused on our ability to address social injustices better when we work together rather than individuals in a separate organization. So again, Dr. Ross, another amazing session. We had leaders from different industries who helped to paint the picture of why we are better together and ultimately why we are a world house and why we need each other.
Absolutely. I remember my very first orientation to nonviolence and hearing about this concept of the World House and remembering Dr. King's quote that before we even leave the house, how we're indebted to half the world. And I think that the way that we're doing this, the Beloved Community Summit, is continuing to reinforce that. It's continuing to reinforce that each of us, there's 8 billion of us, each of us has a role to play, and also that we're all interconnected. We're all part of the world family.
Right. Well, look, y'all, this is just day one. Tomorrow we will be back. The summit continues. So make sure that you lock in, make sure that you get ready, make sure you follow us on social media because we will be back tomorrow. So look, we are back in the morning. I hope you all have an excellent night. The Beloved Community Global Summit is here, and we will see y'all soon.
Thanks, y'all. See you in the morning. Bye-bye. Morning for Atlanta. See you when we see you tomorrow. Thank you.